Chapter 125. Bitch. You have to face your own fate. Medivh, who was under Sardra's control, was in a relationship with Garona, a female half-orc, in an orc's way. Medivh's punches fell like raindrops. This was nothing to Garona, who had been treated with disdain and torment by her fellow orcs since she was a slave. Male. Other than your evil magic, is that all you have? I look down on you. Sardra's was even angrier. On the other hand, Noxus felt that he had the obligation to stop all of this out of chivalry and gentlemanly demeanor. He roared, "Let her go," and charged forward, but he was sent flying by an unknown magic spell from Medivh. And Duque was just a bystander. Although he already knew that this was history repeating itself, Duque still felt that it was an eye-opener. But, Old Max, do you know that you're so awesome? Aren't you afraid that your children will run in front of you and sing, "I call you Dad, you hit my mom"? Idiot. Do you really think you can join the insignificant human kingdom? Come on, face your fate. A mysterious light appeared on Medivh's hands, and countless runes the size of ants flowed on Medivh's palms, the back of his hands, and his arms. The next second, a mysterious force shot into Garona's brow. It was an extremely terrifying image for Garona. She saw the future, a future that she didn't even believe in. The gentle and magnanimous Chief Lang Rin, who represented the entire human kingdom and accepted her, took her in and gave her a home, was actually killed by her own hands. The image was so clear and felt so real. Garona was completely stunned. Lang's expression of disbelief, Lang's son Varian's horrified expression, and the painful expression of the queen who cared about her the most appeared in front of her. There was also the smell and touch of blood, and the horrifying feeling of her digging out Lang's heart with her own hands. Everything was extremely realistic. All these little details piled up, causing Garona to fall into a frenzy. This is impossible? Garona's body suddenly trembled, and she collapsed to the ground, her whole body twitching nonstop. Bastard, what did you do to her? Lothar roared and charged again. I'm just letting her face her inevitable fate. Medivh, who had returned to his normal self, had a mocking and ferocious look on his face. Go to hell, Sardras. Lothar roared and rushed forward. Duque followed him silently. He summoned his signature 36 hands of magic and rained arcane bullets at Medivh. Of course, he knew that it was useless. Such low-density, low-damage arcane missiles might be able to torture orcs or murlocs, but it was nothing to Medivh, who was at the pinnacle of mysterious power in this world. Duque could clearly see that before the sea of arcane missiles could even get within 3 meters of Medivh, they were automatically disintegrated by the high density of mana that escaped from Medivh's body. That was not what he wanted. Duque was playing the role of Khadgar. According to the nature of fate, as long as he integrated himself into the 80% compatibility, he might be able to replace Khadgar's position and successfully kill Medivh. In the history, this was how Medivh dealt with Garona first, and then he used his longsword to tease Lothar. While they were playing fencing, Khadgar, who had been using magic just a moment ago, suddenly ran over and stabbed him to death with his longsword. This history was once thought by Duque to be ridiculous. How could the Medivh that even Sardras feared, that experienced Medivh, be killed so easily? But when he thought about it carefully, it made sense. Think about it, no matter how strong a mage was, if he didn't use magic and instead ran to fight in close combat without any protection, wouldn't he be courting death? Moreover, the moment Khadgar made his move, the remaining good part of Medivh's soul also jumped out and fought with Sardras for control of the body. It would be strange if Sardras didn't die. Duque was reenacting that part of history. Ha! Puny human, you are so weak that I can defeat you without even using magic. Medivh, just like in the history, took out a shiny silver longsword from his spatial storage item and faced Lothar. Medivh's small body was not much better than Duque's. If it was a simple duel between swordsmen, Lothar would teach him a lesson in no time. Even if Orgrim or Illidan's soul came in, it would be useless, let alone Sardra's possession. Sardra's method was very simple: cheating. He directly used the slow spell to reduce Lothar's speed and strength to a level slightly lower than his own, and then they fought fiercely. "Ha! What number 1 swordsman of Stormwind, your strength is only SOSO. He had seen shameless people, but he had never seen someone so shameless. Lothar wanted to say, "Fight me without magic if you can," but he didn't say a word. Of course, he knew that Sargeras was toying with him. And the weak Duque couldn't dispel such a high-level spell for him. Duque? Seeing Duque continuously releasing those low-level trash spells, Sargeras snorted disdainfully at Duque. The great Sea King Duque was ignored by Sargeras just like that. Duque was still the best actor. He roared, and even his neck was so red that it seemed like 2 dicks could be stuck in it. He poured out his magic and released those useless offensive spells. Ice arrows, fireballs, arcane missiles, arcane impacts, and almost all the conventional magic attacks were used by Duque. Everything was a pretense. Looking at Mediva's back, Duque sneered in his heart. "Sargeras, you're arrogant. Arrogant. When I stab my sword into your back, when you discover that Mediva's weak body is your fatal weakness, I really look forward to seeing the Burning Legion's number 1 boss' shocked face." Duque thought that he had done it flawlessly. When he reached his limit and pulled out the King's Protector, to teach Sargeras a lesson, space seemed to be strangely distorted. There seemed to be a strange distortion in space, and then a warm heat appeared on his neck. Duke tilted his head, and in the next moment, he saw himself. A headless version of himself. A version of himself who was spurting out mouthfuls of blood. His vision spun, and then, all he felt was the coldness of the ground. Mediva's boots entered Duque's field of vision. "Wait, something's wrong. I'm dead?" Sargeras's voice suddenly reached Duque's ears. "Idiot, you think I didn't guard against you? If it was my useless disciple, Khadgar, I might have ignored him. But I've always been guarding against you. Ha! Ridiculous. Too ridiculous." Duque died. Chapter 126. No. When Lothar saw that Duque had been killed, he suddenly felt that the world around him had become blank and empty. Apart from Duque's corpse and the Mediv possessed by Sargeras, he couldn't see or hear anything. An unprecedented grief and indignation surged in his heart like a volcanic eruption. He used to think that he had seen through life and death, and was used to seeing his comrades die. He was no longer afraid, and he could treat the death of everyone around him coldly. In fact, when he faced this moment again, Lothar still found that he couldn't do it. From the moment he met Duque, Lothar only felt that he was a talented and flamboyant kid. When he was Duque's age, he vaguely remembered that he had done a lot of crazy things, but whenever there was a problem, there was always Lang, the prince, to take care of it. At that time, Lothar only had pure admiration for Duque. When the name Sea King Duque appeared, Lothar originally didn't like this kind of person who relied on business to rise, but as time passed, Lothar changed his view. Everything that Duque did proved that he was responding to the crisis, for the benefit of Stormwind, and even for the benefit of the entire human race. If Duque was just that, then Duque would be a very good assistant minister. But everything that happened in Karazhan made Lothar secretly raise his evaluation of Duque to an unprecedented level. Brave, wise, smart, kind-hearted, and highly principled. This was definitely the template of a top young hero. Lothar quickly realized that if Duque was allowed to grow, he would be the pillar of Stormwind's next generation. He and Lang were still in the prime of their lives, but they would grow old after all. Prince Varian was still young, and when the time came, it would definitely not be Lothar who would help Varian to the end. Duke Bolvar for Dragon was a very good candidate. Unfortunately, he would at most be an assistant minister in the ordinary domain. After losing Mediv, the Stormwind Kingdom needed a new flag in the field of magic, no matter how one looked at it. When he killed Prince Malcheser, Lothar had secretly made a decision. If he succeeded this time, he would definitely recommend Duque to the throne when he returned. However, just as Lothar made up his mind, Duque was killed by Sargeras in front of him with the face and body of his old friend of decades. A guardian level, slow, and a plain horizontal slash ended the hope of Stormwind's future. The death of a genius was the most painful. Ah! Noxus roared furiously like a berserk lion while activating a certain item that was supposed to be a trump card. His entire body radiated a burst of golden light. Lothar, whose strength, speed, agility, exorcism, and other attributes had all soared, suddenly approached Medivh. Medivh's face revealed a slightly surprised expression. The king's sword, which was emitting a bright light, suddenly slashed down. What greeted it was not Medivh's magic, but a huge metal arm with a blue base and silver edges. Even with the king's sword's almost indestructible sharpness and powerful exorcism effect, it was still unable to break through the defense of this arm. The long sword and the metal arm collided, causing dazzling sparks. The metal on the huge arm let out a shrill cry, and even the metal arm bent slightly backwards. After all, it was still blocked. Only then did Lothar notice that the huge pile of metal beside the mana pool just now was an unactivated golem. Now, this huge golem with condensed arcane energy as its body and metal parts as its auxiliary had become a natural barrier between him and the demon king Sargeras. Lothar, I'm tired of playing with you. A slightly better existence among ants like you is not worthy of my personal attack. You are only worthy of fighting with the toys I created. You, Anduin Lothar, just like that little guy Duque, go to hell. Medivh's face showed the greatest evil aura. Every contorted facial curve on his face was condensed with malevolence and disgust. Medivh's whole body began to transform. Two long, flaming horns protruded from his head. His delicate and elegant face became withered, and three awl-like spikes protruded from his chin. His exposed skin had also become dry, like the bark of a dead tree. But between the dry and cracked skin, a huge green light could be clearly seen flowing in this body that could once accommodate the power of all the guardians of the Tirisfal Council. Lothar wanted to curse Sargeras, but he could not breathe under the pressure of this huge arcane golem's crazy attack. The golem's fist was too big and too fast. With Lothar's speed, dodging was completely an extravagant hope. When the heavy fist that was enough to split a mountain and split a stone hit, although Lothar had tilted his shield in an attempt to deflect the thunderous force, Lothar obviously failed. It was difficult to use an epic-level shield in this kind of battle. The rare shield branded with the lion emblem of Stormwind City turned into powder in just 1/10 of a second. The only thing that could protect Lothar was the king's sword. Parrying with his sword horizontally was a standard military sword technique. It was the only way out. The king's sword, which had suffered a heavy blow, showed unimaginable toughness. Even if it bent backward as much as possible, even if it had clearly revealed an arc, the king's sword still did not break. If it were another warrior, they might have been crushed by the huge force of this huge golem and killed on the spot. Lothar was Lothar. In a split second, he could still quickly adjust the pace of his legs and shift his center of gravity. Before the surging force that mortals could match destroyed his body, he dodged to the left, and his center of gravity moved to the side. The golem's huge fist suddenly missed. Even the ground that had been reinforced by special magic couldn't withstand such a violent heavy blow. With a bang, stone chips flew everywhere. If Lothar hadn't insisted on wearing a suit of armor, perhaps he would have been turned into a bloody sieve by the sharp and high-speed stones because he couldn't dodge in time. The punch missed, but Lothar's crisis was not over. The huge golem's fierce attack continued without any pause. The giant fist that should have been inserted into the ground suddenly swung horizontally, almost blasting half of Lothar's body into meat paste. Lothar couldn't even deal with a golem, let alone Sargeras, who was watching a beast fight next to him. For the first time, despair gripped Lothar's heart tightly. At this time, there was a loud noise outside Karazhan Tower. It was a super strong attack that even Karazhan, which was in an independent space, felt a strong shock. Chapter 127. Just a few minutes ago, the sky outside of Karazhan had completely changed. Dark clouds covered the horizon, like a storm that was about to sweep over. However, this storm was not a dead thing from nature. Every molecule that made up the storm was a dragon that mortals would rarely see in their lifetime. The huge wings flapped powerfully, and every time the wings flapped, it seemed to make the whole sky tremble. The dragons let out a low roar inadvertently as they breathed. There were all kinds of auras such as flames, and the faint sound of wind and thunder, making their power even more extraordinary. Most of the dragons were red, mixed with a very small amount of green and bronze. They raised their speed to the maximum, and this was completely the rhythm of swooping down to wash the ground with dragon breath. On a mountain peak not far from Karazhan, a woman with gorgeous red horns strode forward. With her firm steps, the long red hair behind her head fluttered in the wind. Wrapped in a red bikini armor with golden edges, her exposed skin had the healthiest wheat-colored skin. She walked proudly towards a mysterious man in a long robe standing at the top of the mountain. "Yo, Aegwin, are you sure your plan will really work? All the dragons that can be summoned on planet Azeroth are basically here. I don't want the dragon bloodline to go extinct. The matter of the blue dragon and black dragon is enough to make my heart ache." That mysterious person was the previous guardian of Azeroth, Aegwin, the mother of Medivh. She gently pulled down her hood, revealing a beautiful face that didn't look old at all. "Old friend, we have guarded this world together for hundreds of years. I think we have the same attitude towards demons, don't we? Alexstrasza." If Duque were here, he would definitely exclaim that history was completely unreliable. Aegwin, who should have been severely injured by Sargeras, held back because she received the warning signal in advance. She was defeated, but she wasn't seriously injured like in history, and could only hide to recuperate. It was just a minor injury, so she had the strength to gather a group of old friends to deal with Sargeras together. 10,000 years ago, it was the combined power of the 5 dragon aspects that created the dragon soul, to teach the invading demons how to be human. 10,000 years later, the Black Dragon King, Nesario, had betrayed the Blue Dragons, the Emerald Dream of the Green Dragons had been corroded, and the Bronze Dragon King, Nozdormu, had disappeared. The Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, the only one who could move, still stood up and called for all the dragons to participate in the siege against Karazhan. Faced with Aegwin's answer, the Red Dragon Queen raised a new question. "Yes, we can't let Sargeras do whatever he wants, but if Sargeras really has complete control over Medivh's soul and all of Karazhan's power, we'll only die if we attack." Aegwin smiled at the Red Dragon Queen's worry. "I had the same worry as you. However, it seemed that we had received unexpected reinforcements. A little fellow had used special means to disrupt Sargeras' senses and communications. He gave me the opportunity to control part of Karazhan's defenses." "Part?" "That's right. The most important anti-air firepower won't be activated." "All right, you've convinced me for now. If the Red Dragon race falls this time, I'll tear you apart first, Aegwin." With that, the Red Dragon Queen left without looking back. "Alas, Alexstrasza, your temper is still so hot." As the Red Dragon Queen left, a beautiful and elegant female figure slowly appeared not far from Aegwin. Sky-blue shoulder-length hair, long ears, a moon-white robe, and a dignified and calm temperament. Everything about this mysterious night elf was extraordinary. A huge white tiger accompanied this beautiful night elf dressed like a priestess. Shadow evasion, one of the night elf's signature racial talent skills. This priestess was so powerful that she could even fool the Red Dragon Queen. No, it might not necessarily be fooled. Perhaps Alexstrasza had found out but didn't bother to point it out. Dragons were powerful and proud. There were many things that dragons would not cooperate with other races unless they had no other choice. So the dragons and Aegwin were one thing, and Aegwin finding other helpers was another. Aegwin sighed again. "Thank you for your help." The priestess standing beside the white tiger smiled lightly, revealing a beautiful smile that even the stars paled in comparison. "I'm just helping as an individual. It has nothing to do with the night elves." "Alas, all right, this is at least a beginning." The priestess interrupted Aegwin's topic. "There is no beginning and there is no end. Do you want me to repeat myself?" "No need. Get to work." As the priestess chanted, a mysterious power began to communicate with the entire world. The sky that had been bright a moment ago suddenly darkened. The clouds disappeared. The sun disappeared. What appeared in the sky above Karazhan was a bright starry sky. In the beautiful starry sky, in a constellation that was about to be destroyed and burned out, A huge star broke into pieces, disintegrating into countless rays of light that scattered in the dark sky. However, under the guidance of Elun's divine power, dozens of huge star fragments began to approach planet Azeroth at high speed. The blazing light cut through the sky, brutally tore through the atmosphere, and fell straight towards Karazhan. The fall of the stars was under control. Under the control of unimaginable power of mortals, the huge meteorite fragment crashed into Karazhan's magic shield with a ferocious power that could destroy the world. The powerful magic shield that could withstand the siege of tens of thousands of mortal warriors for several months failed in less than a tenth of a second under this earth-shattering blow. The shield was easily broken like a soap bubble. The trajectory of the slanted fall, the strong wind pressure, and the ear-piercing whistling sound all announced the arrival of destruction to the master of Karazhan. Bastard, who is it? It was only then that Sargeras reacted as if he had just woken up from a dream, and there was an angry roar in the Mage Tower. Unfortunately, it was too late. The first falling meteorite fragment was the size of a carriage. Under the acceleration of gravity, the perfect combination of speed and gravity was the entire highly enchanted main gate of Karazhan, which even siege alls could not shake at all, along with the two-story building, collapsed into powder in an instant. The second meteorite fragment fell, and the secondary tower that guarded the main tower of Karazhan was like a sandcastle that had been washed away by the waves. It collapsed into powder in an instant, and dissipated with the wind in the direction that the meteorite had come from. The third, fourth, more than a dozen meteorite fragments fell with a loud bang. Even someone as powerful as Sargeras could not help but be flustered under this kind of attack. This was the signature move of a famous priestess, falling stars. Chapter 128. Duque died. Once again. After a few months, he had almost forgotten the smell of death. There were some things that he could never get used to, such as dying again and again. In the game, when the team was wiped out while exploring the boss, running to the corpse again and again was not a problem at all. In this real Azeroth, the punishment of death was more terrifying than Duque had imagined. Duque's soul was not in the graveyard near Karazhan, nor did he have the option to give up healing and resurrect in the graveyard. His soul had always been next to his corpse, surrounded by a lifeless scene. The scene of death, which he had once been very uncomfortable with, extended to the end of his vision. In the black and white world in front of him, there were dark gray, almost black clouds floating everywhere. They seemed to be pulled by some invisible force on Sargeras' body. They slowly rotated around Sargeras like a whirlpool, like a slowly rotating tornado. Just as he had feared, when he encountered a superior demon, his soul was very easily corrupted and eroded. Now it was bound by the evil power of the Demon King. System notification: you have been killed by the Demon King Sargeras. Due to the image of highly concentrated demon power, your soul power is only left with 70% and your humanity is 60%. Warning, you are now within the range of Sargeras' soul corruption. You will lose 1 soul power and 1% of your humanity every 5 minutes. You cannot leave the 100-meter radius of Sargeras in your soul state. Fortunately, Duque still saw the option to pick up the corpse and resurrect, and Sargeras didn't seem to notice his special soul. He didn't dare to resurrect. If he resurrected casually, he would be easily killed again, and it would make Sargeras even more vigilant. He couldn't drag it out for too long. Otherwise, he could only join the Burning Legion and become a demon. Duque could wait, but he wouldn't sit still and wait for death. When he couldn't hold on any longer, he would naturally give it his all. However, Duque in his soul state wouldn't just sit around and do nothing. He had done something that most mortals couldn't imagine. He had hacked into Karazhan's defense system. This wasn't just his own effort. The greater credit was due to the system elf and a certain special existence. There was no doubt that the system elf was powerful. In the world with computers before his transmigration, most of the complicated and relatively simple tasks were handled by computers. Not so in Azeroth. If there was no magic, this would still be a world where the officers on the battlefield could only shout orders, and if they were too far away, they could only release signal flares or have the cavalry act as messengers. Even if there were spells, magic arrays, and other defense systems, they were still mostly simple information feedback. For example, if someone triggered a certain alarm system in Karazhan, even the most sophisticated sensor could only barely sense the strength of the other party, the number of people, and other basic information. In order to carefully assess the enemy's strength, the mage himself had to use Mage's Eye and other observation methods to confirm it with his own eyes. If the owner of Karazhan was still Medivh, Duque might not have been able to do anything. But Sargeras was another matter altogether. Previously, in order to confuse others, Karazhan's entire magic defense system was set up in the style of humans. Basically, Sargeras wasn't easy to use. After Sargeras completely controlled Medivh, he didn't have the time to change the entire mage tower to the system that demons were used to, because Sargeras was busy plotting against the 6 members of the Tirisfal Council. Sargeras didn't think it would be useful, so he left a big gap for Duque. Moreover, Duque had a helper, the soul of Medivh's biological father, Alan. On the night that Medivh came of age, he was awakened by a nightmare. The huge energy in his body began to explode, crossing the astral plane and alarming the priests of the Northshire Abbey. They rushed to the storm's stronghold at top speed, and Alan and hundreds of priests worked together to suppress the explosion of energy. A few days later, the energy suddenly disappeared. Medivh fell into a deep sleep, and his father, Nyelas Alan, fell to the ground and died from exhaustion. But no one knew that Alan's soul hadn't completely dissipated. In history, when Medivh was killed by Khadgar, Alan's soul, who was bound in Karazhan, was eroded by evil power and became a boss called Shadow of Alan. Previously, after Duque dealt with the evil hoof, he went to visit Alan's soul. At this moment, Alan was still rational. After learning that his favorite child, Medivh, had been eroded by Sargeras, Alan decided to help. Few people knew that Medivh's achievements were not only because of his mother Egwene's extremely powerful bloodline and the inheritance of the Guardian's power, but also because of the teachings of Nyelas Alan, the former court mage of Stormwind. So when Medivh built Karazhan later, he used Alan's knowledge and design concepts. With the system elf working and Medivh's father as a traitor, it would be strange if Duque didn't stir up trouble. After the system elf completely analyzed this defense system, Duque wasn't just adding water to milk. He was simply mixing milk into water to fool Sargeras. In the air outside Karazhan, it seemed like a tragic massacre had just begun. In the air near Karazhan, which seemed to be just an ordinary building, countless complicated and precise magic circles suddenly flashed. Different colors represented the different elemental realms that the magic circles connected to. With the support of the huge magic pool, these magic circles were able to open the openings to the elemental realms to the limit. Along with the dazzling magical radiance, huge blazing fireballs, long icy arrows, and cyclones that could easily cut through steel poured out in the direction where the dragons were coming from. 100? 1,000? No, it was a magic storm formed by tens of thousands of magic circles that surrounded the entire Karazhan. This magic storm easily engulfed the dragons thousands of meters away. Egwene, the largest red dragon among the dragons, roared angrily in Egwene's direction. Seeing this, the Red Dragon Queen's first reaction was that she had been tricked. Dragons had quite good magic resistance, but it was only good. They couldn't achieve the legendary complete immunity to magic. With such a huge amount of high-level magic pouring down, it was obvious that the dragons would be greatly weakened after this battle, even if they didn't go extinct. No wonder Alexstrasza was mad. She could almost imagine that in an instant her children, her people, would be pierced through by powerful magic or directly through their bodies. They would scream in despair and fall from the sky, sprinkling a noble rain of blood. However, after the storm-like attack, it seemed that not a single falling dragon was seen. What the hell? Chapter 129. In a few breaths' time, other than the barrage created by the conventional low-damage magic seals, all the large magic seals shone brightly again. It's coming! Be careful to dodge. Alexstrasza shouted. Dragons were strong, but their strongest point was not their long-range attacks. Draconic magic could rarely kill enemies hundreds of meters away. Dragon breath only had a short range of a few dozen meters. The strongest point of the dragon race was naturally their unparalleled melee combat. In close combat, the dragon race rarely had a match. Speaking of which, even with the support and cover of Goddess Elun's Chosen, this distance of nearly 1,000 meters was still a space of death for the dragon race. However, when the huge magic seal at the top of Karazhan, which had a diameter of more than 50 meters, let out a deafening roar, the magic cannon that symbolized Karazhan's fiercest attack was sent flying. Looking at the cannon that brushed past the top of the group of dragons, ready to use arcane energy to conquer the Sea of Stars, the Red Dragon Queen knew that Egwene's words about a traitor were true. Beams of different colored light stabbed into the group of dragons like forks, but they did not even take off a few dragon hairs, let alone dragon scales. So scary. This kind of attack. It only looks scary. The group of dragons maintained their high-speed charge while whispering. Not only the guys below, but the Red Dragon Queen was also muttering, "Koristrash, what do you think?" The red dragon called Koristrash might be a little unfamiliar to everyone, but in the future, his human form would be more commonly known as Krasis. The current Krasis was just a dragon follower. Koristrash stared at the gorgeous but useless magic barrage for a full 3 seconds. A genius is controlling Karazhan's magic defense system. If it's not some special magic puppet, then this guy's strength must be very shocking. At this moment, Egwene touched a sore spot. A mage spoke to her through telepathy. "Alexstrasza, what did you say just now?" "Nothing. My throat is itchy, so I roared to call you." The Red Dragon Queen blushed. Well, her face was already red, so it was impossible to tell. Under Duque's secret control, Karazhan's defense system became the most gorgeous fireworks system. The fiercest and most powerful firepower would definitely be fired in a direction that absolutely could not be hit. Only the small magic arrays that couldn't hurt the dragons would be more serious about bombarding the dragons. The Red Dragon Queen felt like she had been tricked, not to mention everything else. I really don't know if that guy did it on purpose or not. As the leader of the Red Dragons, it was only natural that he would receive the strongest firepower. Moreover, the Red Dragon Queen's body was the largest and the easiest to hit. Unfortunately, that bastard had been flirting with Alexstrasza all along. Dozens of arcing, delayed explosions, and direct attacks had forced the Red Dragon Queen to change her flight path 7 times in just 3 seconds. However, she was still easily forced into a dead end. However, when she was about to activate the magic defense circle and take a heavy blow, the opponent threw a harmless low-density arcane bomb. It was like a paint bullet in an air combat simulation. Let me tell you, I can really shoot you down, but it's just a fake fight. The Red Dragon Queen felt terrible after being slapped in the face. A distance of 1,000 meters was nothing for the dragons. If it wasn't for the fact that they were being careful and kept everyone flying irregularly, they would really be there in a short while. Obviously, they had worried too much. In general, apart from the Red Dragon Queen, 99% of the dragons had successfully passed through what was supposed to be a dead space. No matter how stupid Sargeras was, he realized that he had been played. The magic defense system of this era usually used some fixed shooting routes to form a barrage, and then cooperated with magic apprentices or controllers to further divide the air defense zone. However, Sargeras neglected one thing. He didn't have lower-level officers or magic apprentices to help him deal with the defense system independently. He had wanted to use demons, but the entire mage tower had been designed according to human standards. For example, the control rooms couldn't be entered by larger demons. This became a flaw. Bastard! Who did this? Although he cursed, Sargeras certainly couldn't let these big lizards charge into Karazhan unscrupulously. Karazhan had the pool of magic that supported the entire dark portal. If these big lizards really charged in and destroyed the pool of magic, his plan to corrupt the world of Azeroth through the dark portal and further open the space barrier would completely fail. Kill them! With Sargeras's roar, the vertical pupils of the dragons reflected the vortex-like portals in the air around Karazhan. They could even see that on the other side of the purple vortex full of chaos and evil, there was a world that had become desolate and dead because of complete destruction. The scorched earth that had been burned to the point where there was no longer a trace of life left by the hellfire filled every corner of the other side of the portal in their field of vision. Now, stepping on that dead land, huge demons with long horns and huge bat wings rushed out through the portal at high speed. However, the dragons were moving faster than the demons had imagined. In the blink of an eye, the dragons had already rapidly expanded in the demons' field of vision. From a small black dot on the horizon to every scale on their ferocious dragon heads, it was really only a matter of a few blinks of an eye. It was like a replica of the battle between the 5-colored dragons and the Burning Legion 10,000 years ago. The earth-shattering roar resounded through the earth again. But it was obviously different from that time. For the first time, the demon army was at a disadvantage. A large number of demons didn't have time to pass through the portal before they were blocked by the dragon's breath. They couldn't use their advantage in numbers at all. A large number of burly half-dragons that were as tall as 3 people jumped down from the backs of the dragons, waving double-headed blades that were more than 10 meters long and cutting the bodies of the demons. Sargeras almost went crazy with anger when he saw the image transmitted through the mirror. It was the first time he had fought so hard. On the mountain peak next to him, Aegwyn pursed her lips. "Not enough, not enough." "What's wrong?" asked the night elf priestess, who was still casting Starfall. Sargeras used the energy of the magic pool in Karazhan to forcibly open a temporary portal and teleport some of the Burning Legion demons over. But if they continue fighting like this, there will be no end to it. Before Karazhan's magic is exhausted, the losses of the dragons will continue to increase. The problem is that Karazhan's magic is enough for Sargeras to last for a long time. Is there any way? There's nothing we can do on our side. Us. Chapter 130. Unless. The priestess raised her head proudly, and the light of divinity flowed in her eyes. Unless the group of people who raided Karazhan can deal a fatal blow to the Demon King while we're holding back most of Sargeras' forces. Can they do it? The Night Elves expressed their doubts. The one inside is a descendant of Thoradin. Thoradin the Great was a name that even the most ignorant Night Elves had heard of. Even though the Night Elves didn't have much contact with the humans, it didn't stop them from knowing that there was a hero on another continent who chased away the trolls, united the various human tribes, and built a great empire. Hearing this name, the priestess was in awe. If Anduin Lothar really did it, then he'll be the hero of the entire world of Azeroth. Aegwyn's voice lowered. What was Lothar, whom Aegwyn had high hopes for, doing? Sorry, this great hero was running away in a sorry state. Lothar was very tired. He could hear his extremely heavy breathing. The sound of blowing bellows announced that his physical strength had dropped to a very low level. His lungs, which felt like they were not enough no matter how much oxygen he inhaled, could no longer squeeze out more of his physical strength. He took off his helmet, and after the shoulder strap of his armor was accidentally broken, he had to take the opportunity to remove and throw away the armor. He only had time to throw away the well-bound gauntlets and leggings. It couldn't be helped. In front of the golem whose power was beyond human imagination, the word power was meaningless. The only way to save his life was to dodge flexibly. Between the 12 pillars surrounding the workshop, Lothar rolled and crawled to dodge the attacks of the giant golem again and again. Gradually, his physical strength and luck seemed to have reached the end. Lothar glanced at his old friend Medivh, the guy who should be called Sargeras now. An evil red light glowed in the eyes that were sunken into the sockets. Its white teeth seemed to be ready to devour people at any time. Its withered body that did not have a trace of life aura was even more frightening. Sargeras ignored Lothar and muttered a series of demon incantations that Lothar did not understand. He didn't know if this was the incantation to maintain the door of darkness or something else. Looking at Garona, who was still twitching on the ground, and Duque's corpse, whose blood had gradually turned cold, Lothar's will to resist did not weaken at all, but despair had unknowingly gripped Lothar's heart. In front of the leader of the Burning Legion, Sargeras, the little power of humans was too insignificant. They couldn't even be considered a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Even if Lothar guessed that Sargeras had been pinned down, what else could he do? He couldn't even escape the giant golem's pursuit. The enormous lightning balls that the golem threw out were glittering with blue and white electric arcs, emitting ear-splitting noises that stimulated Lothar's nerves non-stop and threatened him. If he dared to cross the line, Lothar's only outcome would be to be burnt. Lothar took advantage of an opening and used all his strength to rush over. He failed. The huge golem was more agile than he had imagined. A huge fist blasted over, and Lothar had no choice but to roll awkwardly to avoid this blow. The fist blasted less than a meter away from Lothar, which happened to be a huge pillar. The destructive shock spread to the ceiling above Sargeras' head, and a huge black line of twisting cracks immediately appeared on the wall. The black line was spreading at high speed, and after a while a small part of the entire workshop collapsed. Crush! Rubble fell all over the ground, and unknowingly, it covered Duque's corpse. Lothar had no time to care because another heavy punch from the golem had already arrived. It's over! Even before the fist arrived, Lothar knew that he couldn't dodge it this time. Not only was his stamina almost exhausted, but a piece of rubble had also hit his ankle just now, and a piercing pain suddenly came. Perhaps he would be fine after resting for a while, but the problem was that the inhumane golem would not give its enemies time to rest. Bam! With a loud bang, Lothar was swept away by the golem's giant fist. At this moment, Lothar only felt that his internal organs had shifted positions. Death was right in front of him. Oh, he was very tired. He was physically and mentally exhausted, and he couldn't even stand up. As a swordsman, he should never abandon his sword, but it had already been knocked away by the bombardment just now. After spinning a few times, the king's sword lay quietly behind Medivh. Sargeras' face was full of mockery. He didn't stop chanting, and used a voice that came from his soul to talk to Lothar. Lothar. Lothar, you finally reached the end of your life. Why, do you have any thoughts? Lothar should have truly and completely lost all hope. But at this moment, a strange figure appeared on the back of the huge golem. It was a shadow that was close to a soul, but Lothar dared to swear that the ghost was definitely Duque. There was no way he would mistake the face that had filled his mind since the beginning. He also clearly saw the soul-like Duque give him a hand gesture. That was what he had taught Duque before entering Karazhan. It meant, I need cover. Cover? What cover? Well, the only thing he could do was to taunt. Lothar sat up in a very pretentious manner and combed his hair with his left hand. Sorry, it's not time for me to sum up my life yet, because I have a shocking secret about the world of Azeroth. At this point, Lothar's voice trailed off. Sargeras' interest was piqued. He had seen many people who betrayed their masters for glory. The so-called heroes were definitely one in a million who persisted to the end. He wasn't afraid that Lothar would lie to him. In Sargeras' opinion, Lothar wouldn't benefit from lying to him. Moreover, Lothar was a descendant of the human Thoradin the Great. Maybe he really had some secrets. Sargeras approached Lothar as he chanted. Beside Lothar, the huge golem raised its fist high, ready to smash Lothar into minced meat at any time. It was only waiting for Sargeras' command. Standing in front of Lothar, Sargeras raised his chin arrogantly and looked down at Lothar, who was walking on the ground. You can speak now. Of course, the consequences of angering me are worse than death. You have to know one thing. Mortals are not finished at all in front of my power. Well, my secret is... At this point, Lothar's voice became weaker and weaker. In the second half of the sentence, Lothar's voice suddenly became louder. It was like a lion's roar. King Devil Dash. Chapter 131. After shouting, Noxus really didn't have any strength left. Ever since he saw that Duque, who he didn't know if it was an illusion, appeared again and gestured to him that he was done, he went all out. Sure enough, as soon as he finished speaking, a middle-aged ghost in a Stormwind Court mage robe suddenly appeared on his left. Without saying a word, he directly shot an ice arrow at Sargeras. Sargeras was also stunned. Who is he? But in the next moment, the memory from Medivh told Sargeras who this strange ghost mage was. Nielas Allen. Medivh's biological father. This is really a ghost. Why is Alan's soul here? Why does he have the ability to release magic? A series of questions further disturbed Sargeras' attention. Of course, this was not fatal. Almost subconsciously, Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, instantly opened a magic shield. In the face of the highest level of magic, low concentration of magic was nothing at all. Alan's attack could only surprise Sargeras for a while. However, no one would have thought that the mastermind of all this was Duque. Knowing that Sargeras was so difficult to deal with, would Duque only arrange one killer move? Without any reason, the golem's lightning-covered fist came crashing down. The moment the golem moved, Sargeras didn't react. Because in his mind, the golem was automatically protecting its master. He didn't think the golem's attack could cause any real damage to Alan. But after figuring out that Alan was actually a spirit, Sargeras had more means to deal with this Medivh's biological father. Huh! The eyes of Medivh, who was controlled by Sargeras, suddenly flashed. It was a frightening light. Because Sargeras was shocked to find that the golem's fist actually changed direction in the air and blasted straight at his head. What the hell? Sargeras had to make a second reaction in such a short time. He even interrupted Medivh's incantation and summoned two huge flaming arms at the cost of magic backlash. It was a pair of huge flaming arms the size of a carriage. The flaming arms, half real and half illusory, burst out from Sargeras' left and right sides. The hands crossed their fingers and caught the golem's heavy punch, which was originally enough to smash Medivh's body into minced meat. Phew! Sargeras was also shocked. The moment the crisis was over, he couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. At the same time, he thought to himself, what's wrong with this garbage golem? I must tear it down when I have time. Just then, an unprecedented sense of danger spread through Sargeras' consciousness. Behind him, the Demon King was indeed the Demon King. He had clearly suffered a series of attacks, and he was already too busy. Even at this time, he still had a reaction. He almost subconsciously prepared to use the mage's signature skill, Flash, which could instantly transform his body into arcane energy and teleport him more than 10 meters away. The fact that he was forced to use Flash proved that he was in a sorry state. Sargeras had always been disdainful of the mage's ordinary magic. But Sargeras had no choice. His body now belonged to Medivh. The mage's frail body couldn't take a beating at all. If Medivh's body was destroyed, he would also be in big trouble. Sargeras almost forced himself to recite the incantation. However, after 1/100th of a second, the incantation didn't start. A soul power from his body stopped him and wantonly fought with him for control of the body. Medivh? It was actually Medivh's soul. At this most critical moment, Medivh's remnant soul actually ran out and ruined things. A terrible feeling of foreboding filled Sargeras' heart. The appearance of Medivh not only interfered with all his spellcasting, but also made his whole body stiff. The next moment, a scorching pain suddenly spread in Sargeras' chest. What? Sargeras' neck was like a rusty machine. With great difficulty, he lowered his head and looked at his chest. A blade that emitted a dazzling golden light pierced through the center of Medivh's chest. It was stained with human blood that contained the energy of the fallen titan. An incomparably strong holy aura was spreading through Medivh's body at an unimaginable speed. No, Sargeras let out an earth-shattering roar. His magical voice even made the entire Karazhan and the surrounding areas tremble. Around Karazhan, the battlefield that had been fiercely fighting fell silent. The demons that were fighting raised their heads in shock, and cold air flowed between their sharp teeth. The dragon let go of the demon's mouth and raised its head. The half-dragon, who was being suppressed, also raised its head and looked at the highest level of Karazhan. The red dragon queen, Aegwynn, and the night elf priestess also had clear ecstasy in their eyes. Everyone could tell that Sargeras had been hit. This heart-wrenching sound was accompanied by the rapid weakening of the magic transmission from the various portals on the battlefield, as well as the disappearance of the magic light on the Karazhan Mage Tower, which hadn't weakened since the beginning of the battle. Everyone realized that Sargeras was done for. Although they didn't know who did it, it was obvious that a certain existence had given Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, a fatal blow. Lothar's pupils suddenly shrank. He couldn't believe his eyes. Holding the hilt of the sword, the person who appeared behind Medivh was actually Duque. It wasn't Duque's ghost, but Duque. Had he seen a ghost? Or was it that he was already a dead man, and his soul was preparing to accompany Duque on his journey? Lothar's heart was in a mess. Originally, Lothar didn't believe that Duque's ghost could do anything. He was just trying to make a desperate attempt. Now Lothar was a dead man, and he was treating him like a living person. Anyway, Duque was on his side, and his situation couldn't get any worse. He would take a gamble. A true hero never lacked courage, and was more willing to give hope to someone he trusted. Lothar had cooperated with Duque purely because of this mentality. Who would have thought that Duque would actually come up with a chain of tricks and kill Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, in one fell swoop? This was simply beyond imagination. Wasn't Duque dead? Time and space seemed to have completely frozen. Duque's face was cold, and he had no intention of relaxing at all. The king's sword, which should only be used by Lothar, the descendant of Thoradin the Great, burst out waves of dazzling brilliance in Duque's hands. This was the power of humans, the will of Thoradin the Great and the other human sages. It represented the will of humans that had been passed down for thousands of years, and the indomitable will to survive on this land. It could be said that, in a sense, this king's sword was a collection of human consciousness. Now, at this moment, Duque had used the sword to stab Medivh to death. Chapter 132. There were too many questions in Lothar's mind. Why did Duque, who should have been beheaded, come back to life? Why did it seem like Duque had planned all of this? Why could Duque hide from Sargeras' senses and seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to kill Sargeras in one fell swoop? A series of questions almost broke Lothar's mind. On the other side, Lothar was also filled with emotions. Victory. He actually won. He had thought that this was a backlash of despair. Even though Lothar had been cheering for the warriors, he had always been prepared to show these demons the backbone of humans even if he didn't succeed. He didn't expect it to become another important milestone in the history of the war between humans and demons. It didn't matter how much power Sargeras possessed in Madison's body. No matter how many powerful existences helped to restrain Sargeras' power, a kill was a kill. The one who killed the Lord of the Burning Legion, the King of Demons, and the fallen Titan Sargeras for the billions of living beings in Azeroth was Duke Marcus. This was the most profound stroke worthy of being engraved in the history books. Lothar propped himself up and looked at the sword that he was incomparably familiar with that was blooming with holy golden light. Lothar suddenly recalled that sentence, "Those who fight for humanity will receive my protection." Ancestor Thoradin's whispers still echoed in his ears. Lothar suddenly had a realization. Why could Duque pick up the sword of the king with a will? It was very simple. From the beginning, it wasn't the sword of the king. Thoradin himself wasn't the chosen king. It was purely because an emperor could better unify the scattered human clans that there was Thoradin the Great and this sword of the king. This sword, which should have been nameless, would only flow with the blood of the enemies of humanity. It only fought for humans, so anyone who held it was destined to bleed only for humans. If one day, the sword-bearer betrayed the ideals inherited from the ancient kings, then the sword-bearer's life would definitely wither. However, the stars of the ancient sages and kings would still rise and continue to shine upon the Azeroth, protecting the human race for generations to come. Noxus might have many questions, but he suddenly realized that these questions were no longer important. Everyone had their own trump cards and secrets. Duque had picked up the king's sword. This proved that Duque was a hero recognized by all the ancient kings. Gazing at the golden light on the sword, Noxus' eyes blurred. He seemed to have heard an ancient battle song from more than 1,000 years ago, majestic and impassioned. This was the belief passed down by the late Emperor Thoradin to all human descendants. This was a legacy that had transcended thousands of years. This was humanity's will to strive to become stronger in this land full of cruel competition. Looking at Duque's young face, Lothar, who was in his 40s, suddenly felt a little old. It's good to be young. Wait a minute. Young? It was supposed to be a happy ending of defeating the evil superboss, but Lothar was shocked to see that Duque's face was rapidly growing. No, it was rapidly aging. Almost in the blink of an eye, Duque's face grew from a childish 14-year-old to a 16-year-old. 17 years old. 18 years old. But this wasn't growing. This should be some kind of extremely vicious curse that Sargeras cast before his death. He was using the last of his strength to counterattack Duque. Just as Duque held the sword with both hands and forcefully stirred and tore Mediva's heart, Sargeras raised his left hand and backhanded Duque with a mysterious black energy pattern. Sargeras's roar before his death proved this point. Duke Marcus, you ant, do you think this is the end? I'm immortal. I'm immortal. But you have to pay for hurting me. Sargeras's furious voice reverberated throughout Karazhan and even the entire Upwind Trail area. At that moment, every human, elf, and giant dragon who participated in the attack on Karazhan heard the name of the hero who killed Sargeras. They were happy for Duque. They were also worried for Duque. That was the counterattack of the King of Demons. Who dared to say that they could withstand it? The horror of demons wasn't just their incomparably strong combat power, but also their strange, terrifying curses that were impossible to guard against. If they were not careful, even a dragon with an incomparably strong body would die tragically. The other dragons could only watch helplessly as their companions died in pain and despair. Not to mention the frail humans. In fact, even Duque himself was regretting it, let alone the others. Damn, why did I have to deal the final blow? Damn it, is Khadgar's tragedy going to happen to me? At that moment, Duque's heart was filled with tears. Before he killed Mediv, who was possessed by Sargeras, Duque had been thinking about how to kill old Max. Now that he was dead, Duque suddenly realized another rather important matter. In history, Khadgar had ambushed and killed Mediv, and he had also been cursed by Sargeras before he died. Khadgar's life force had been sucked away. That was why there was Khadgar, who was clearly young, but had a face full of white hair. While time seemed to have frozen, Duke's mind was filled with hundreds of thousands of curses. I didn't think that Khadgar would die for no reason, and I, who replaced Khadgar as the hero who killed Sargeras, would also be cursed by this disgusting curse. He thought about how he, who had clearly been a young man before and after transmigrating, was actually going to become a little old man. Although a certain someone had said, a real man will always be loved no matter what he turns into, but, whoever wanted to turn into an old man could do it themselves. Don't look for me. Alright, even if in his heart, Duque had already flipped the table in anger no less than 1,000,000 times. In reality, only a blink of an eye had passed. Duque didn't dare to let go at all. He continued to pour his mental strength into the king's sword. As long as Sargeras wasn't completely dead, Duque couldn't relax for even a moment. Otherwise, if he allowed this demon king to catch his breath, all of humanity would be dead. He could only watch as the black ray of aging shone on his face. He could only helplessly let Sargeras's curse suck away his life force. This feeling of his body being hollowed out was terrible. Suddenly, an absolutely unexpected figure used his hand to block the trajectory of the black ray shooting towards Duque. Nielas Aaron, the soul of Mediva's father, had used his soul body to block the attack for Duque. Duque's facial muscles froze. Chapter 133. Just like how he couldn't do anything before, Duque was also powerless at this moment. He didn't know what the curse was about, but Duque only knew that Alan's soul, which was originally extremely condensed and full of magic power to release magic, began to dissipate at this moment. Like gravel blown away by the wind, the white-haired Alan's spirit body was disintegrated into soul molecules in Duque's vision. Such a great mage who was loyal to the Stormwind, such a great father, so easily disappeared in the wind. All that was left was a whisper of the soul, "I'm atoning for my child." Duque's eyes suddenly became moist. That's right. He had used Mediva's possession as an excuse to persuade Alan's soul. He didn't expect Alan's father to choose to be completely annihilated in this world for the sake of atoning for his child. It was precisely Alan's sacrifice that temporarily alleviated Duque's curse. At this moment, another person that Duque couldn't imagine came to the rescue. It was Lothar's hand. Lothar had rushed up at some point and grabbed Mediva's hand tightly. A considerable portion of the evil power that was supposed to pour onto Duque's body was diverted by Lothar. Lothar's temples were turning white at a speed visible to the naked eye. "Bastard! You can all wither together." Sargeras was mad. He struggled fiercely, trying to free his body from the sword's piercing, and at the same time tried to increase the strength of the curse. Suddenly, Sargeras discovered that Mediva's right arm had returned to the shape of a human hand. It was a very strange sight. Mediva's left hand was still as thin as a skeleton, and his entire arm emitted a terrifying evil and filthy aura. Mediva's right hand was a perfect human arm. Although it was pale due to the lack of sunlight, it was still a standard human arm. Most importantly, it was holding Mediva's staff, the legendary divine artifact, Atish, Guardian's legendary staff. Ever since the Tirisful Council began to use the power-gathering method, they would inject the magic power of each council member into the Guardian every year. Thus, there were Guardians and this artifact staff with a head shaped like a chicken drumstick. Whenever the Guardian was unable to withstand any more power, the council members would pour the excess power into the staff. Through the efforts of countless generations of powerful wizards and the accumulation of countless years of magic power, Atish rose from an ordinary magic staff all the way to the level of a divine tool. Sargeras had never underestimated it from the start. In order to avoid Atish's backlash, Sargeras even put no less than 10 demonic seals on Mediva's body after he completely controlled it, in an attempt to taint and corrode Atish's power and make it his own. At this moment, as Mediva's soul and will recovered and began to fight with Sargeras for control of the body, coupled with Duque's backstab, which gave Sargeras a deeper sense of crisis, Sargeras accidentally snatched control of the body from Mediv. This was a real fatal blow. "Accept your punishment, Sargeras." Unlike Sargeras's voice that came from the evil soul, this voice was undoubtedly the voice of Noxus's old friend, the kind, benevolent, and generous Mediv. With this roar, the hearts of every living creature within a radius of dozens of miles palpitated inexplicably at the same time. One by one, they raised their heads and looked at the highest point of Karazhan. There, they saw 3 figures that were almost entangled together. Normally, it was impossible to see through the solid outer wall, but the light that bloomed from these 3 figures was so intense that it even penetrated the wall, making it easy for every existence to see their movements. The intense battlefield suddenly fell into silence. In the sky, the sun and the moon were dim. The wind stopped. The clamor on the battlefield also stopped. The entire world seemed to have calmed down, opening up a path for one existence. His name was Mediv. Mediv first closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, all the demonic aura in his pupils had faded, leaving only clarity. But at this moment, Sargeras, who had been paying attention to Duque and Noxus, finally noticed something strange. The air was filled with a holy smell that he was both familiar and hated. It was as if he had traveled through time and returned to the Pantheon's holy hall 25,000 years ago, where he was constantly questioned by the Titans. No, Sargeras suddenly realized that his soul was being squeezed out of Mediva's body. The laws in the surrounding space were deviating, and the demonic power was being pushed out. An even more powerful and incisive power was descending. It descended with unparalleled might, dominating everything and eliminating all opposing powers. Of course, this included Sargeras's power. "This is impossible," Sargeras exclaimed. At the same time, Duque determined through the system that the one who had the upper hand was Mediv, so he decisively stopped the input of his mental strength and reduced the power of the king's sword. His incomparably astute action earned him a grateful look from Mediv. Even though his chest was still pierced by the long sword, even though Mediva's life force was rapidly draining from his chest, Mediv, who had regained control of his body, was still the guardian Mediv revered by the people. Mediva's body was returning to a human body at lightning speed, and Sargeras's ugly soul was being forcibly stripped from Mediva's body by the power from Atish. "Fall into the abyss forever." With an ethereal cry from Mediv, the divine magic staff in his hand, Atish, bloomed with a strong light that was as dazzling as the sun. The next moment, the entire staff exploded. It wasn't just a tiche. Even the magic pool in the workshop and the protective shield of the entire Karazhan all exploded at the same time. The incomparably huge magic explosion caused a terrifying shockwave that instantly destroyed more than half of Headwind Trail. Dragons that weighed dozens of tons were directly sent flying, and the half-dragons and demons that weighed more than a ton were even less than ants. They were blown to some corner. The residences that were originally built on the streets next to Karazhan turned into dust in the blink of an eye. The turbulence filled with high concentration of arcane energy spread further along with the strong wind caused by the shock wave. The few trees in Headwind Trail were all charred black in an instant. The land closest to Karazhan was like a 1,000-layer cake, squeezed layer by the shock wave. With Karazhan as the center, it was squeezed out in all directions. The earthquake caused by this terrifying explosion wasn't just felt in the Twilight Forest. Even a small half of the Elven Forest, which had become an orc-controlled area, could feel the tremors. Chapter 134. What exactly happened? Countless beings were paying attention to this event. Such a shocking explosion was not something that could be caused by an ordinary battle, nor was it something that Pharaoh's failed experiment or the goblins' collective suicidal behavior could achieve. After Lothar brought his men into Karazhan, King Lang, who had been staring at the magic transmission, rushed up like a madman. His eyes were bloodshot as he grabbed the magic image that looked like a large mirror. Originally, it was the scene of the fierce battle in Karazhan, but now it was only pitch black. Who can tell me what happened in Karazhan? Lang was almost gritting his teeth, suppressing his uneasiness and nervousness as he asked the court mage beside him. Several old mages looked at each other, and in the end, the oldest one stood up. Your Majesty, it should be a big explosion in Karazhan. Judging from the sounds at the scene and the final impact, it should be His Excellency Duke Marcus killing the Demon King Sargeras, and then His Excellency Medivh regained his sanity at the last moment. Then, he used the artifact magic staff Atish and all the power of Karazhan to attack Sargeras. The old mage tried to explain his speculation in terms that would not provoke Lang, but he did not say the result, because what happened next could be imagined by everyone. As for the characterization of Medivh, this was a taboo in the entire kingdom's upper echelons. Many nobles, whether openly or secretly, proposed to label him as a traitor and nail him to the pillar of shame, but these were forcefully suppressed by Lang. In fact, it was precisely because King Lang was slow to label Medivh as a traitor that the uninformed nobles ran to Karazhan to seek refuge. Lang punched the communication mirror, and there was a muffled sound. Restore communication as soon as possible. No matter what news there is in Karazhan, I must know immediately. I am going to hold a military meeting now. The aftermath of the Karazhan explosion had a far-reaching impact, and it had various meanings and effects on all levels. Especially on the orcs. To the south of the Swamp of Sorrow, the Horde camp, which was now called the Cursed Land by humans, was still in full swing. The tribal campsite, which had a diameter of over 100 kilometers, was expanding every day. Ghoul Dan's Shadow Council's headquarters was located in a small clan that couldn't even be considered famous. This was a secret stronghold that Ghoul Dan had specially set up for the safety of himself and the Shadow Council. Something big had happened here today. While Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, was fighting against Lothar's assault team and the dragons, Ghoul Dan, the true leader of the tribe, was busy reinforcing the power of the Dark Portal. Ghoul Dan had never truly trusted Medivh. He didn't know that Medivh was possessed by his boss, Kill Jaden's boss, Sargeras. Furthermore, due to the language barrier between orcs and humans as well as the huge difference in body size, the Horde was unable to gather any intelligence on Stormwind. The only thing they could do was to rely on the reports from the scouts riding on the wargs. From Ghoul Dan's point of view, Medivh was a powerful wizard with ulterior motives, a schemer, and an unreliable partner. That was why ever since the orcs had arrived in the world of Azeroth, Ghoul Dan had been thinking of ways to get rid of Medivh's power. He used his power to locate the galactic coordinates of Azeroth, and used his power to reinforce this unstable portal. Although the Horde's warriors seemed to be reinforcing day and night, only Ghoul Dan, who was in charge of the dark portal. Because of the instability of the portal, at least 20% of the warriors had died in the void. Of course, it wasn't that no orcs had asked Ghoul Dan why it was like this. It was easy to pass the time. Because Ghoul Dan had said from the start, only the strongest orcs can safely pass through this portal and fight for the Horde. Those who were weak would all die during the teleportation. The weak are not fit to be warriors of the Horde. The weak have no right to live. When they were teleported over, there was indeed a long distance where they were completely exposed in the void. That was just a few dozen seconds of suffocation, but it misled the Horde's warriors. Oh, so-and-so didn't make it through that part. He was really weak. The weak had no rights. This was the common understanding of the orc tribes for thousands of years. There were a few times when the orcs asked, but no one asked anymore. In reality, those guys were all like flies that had hit an electric mosquito swatter, directly smashing into the spatial barrier of Azeroth and instantly turning into ashes, drifting away with the cosmic wind to who knew where. But at this moment, the transmission of the dark portal was still relying on Medivh and Ghoul Dan's cooperation to maintain it. Well, almost at the same time that Sargeras was sent into the abyss by Medivh, Ghoul Dan, who was like a conjoined twins, was in big trouble. As the leader, Sargeras suddenly withdrew the mental strength that was maintaining the dark portal, and the burden fell on Ghoul Dan's shoulders. It had to be known that the original leader, Medivh and Ghoul Dan had put in 70% of their mental strength. This time, a mental shock that was 1,000,000 times more terrifying than an ancient tsunami suddenly rushed into Ghoul Dan's spiritual sea. A Deshgol Dan suddenly let out an incomparably shrill scream. He covered his head, curled up like a shrimp, and fell to the ground, unconscious. The boss who controlled the entire situation had fainted for no reason, and the entire Shadow Council was in chaos. The chaos behind the orcs didn't affect the orcs' actions on the surface. In the eyes of the great chief Blackhand, cutting off the reinforcements wasn't a big deal. According to the ratio of casualties in most battles between orcs and humans, it really wasn't a big deal for one orc to fight 10 humans. The hundreds of thousands of orcs in front of him were enough to destroy all humans. The Horde's offensive showed no signs of stopping. Duque didn't know about the changes between humans and orcs. After who knew how long, Duque woke up. Cough, cough, cough. Uncle Noxus, are you dead? If you're dead, make a sound. Smoke and dust filled the air, and debris covered the ground. The dissipating arcane energy mixed with a small amount of evil aura, making the top floor of Karazhan so dark that one couldn't even see their fingers. Noxus' voice came from not far away. Rascal, I won't die even if you die. Also, I hope that the people who have gone through life and death with me will call me by my name in the future, and not my surname. Andoin, I actually just told you to make a sound, I didn't tell you to say so much. But judging from your voice, it seems that you really won't die. In fact, Duque's body was sore now. It wasn't because of physical injuries, but because of the chaos in the arcane circuits in his body caused by the explosion. Where's Garona? Garona? Noxus called out a few times, but there was no response. Noxus then asked tentatively, Do you know how Medivh is? A weak voice sounded. Oh, old buddy, I'm not the first one to ask after the explosion. I'm so sad. Huh? Chapter 135. Medivh. Lothar's voice suddenly rose an octave, and anyone could hear the excitement in Lothar's voice. Lothar asked tentatively, Medivh, are you the real person or Sargeras? Okay, secret code, how did the Marquis punish you after you were caught peeping on the Marquis' eldest daughter bathing at his house when you were 15? Duque, Medivh. After a short 2 seconds of silence, when Lothar was about to start to worry, Medivh coughed and scolded in a seemingly weaker voice. You bastard, it was you who went to peep. If it weren't for Lang, the late king would have forced you to become the Marquis' son-in-law. I can't believe such a thing happened. No, you must have remembered wrong. It was Lang who peeped. Lothar began to bullsh*t, shifting the blame and refusing to admit it. But a second later, Lothar suddenly laughed. Medivh, welcome back. Although it was interesting to hear the dark history of these two legendary big shots, Duque had no intention of talking at all because he saw Medivh's status through the system. Well, I'm back. I may have to leave again soon. Oh, no, wait. Damn it. Visud. Lothar, who had been in a relaxed mood, screamed like an animal waiting to be slaughtered. He almost dragged his wounded body, rolling and crawling in the direction of the sound, and crawled to Medivh's side. The smoke and dust gradually dissipated, and Lothar saw Medivh lying on the ground with disheveled hair. This old friend of his who had known him for decades since childhood was clearly dying. Blood bubbled up from the corner of his mouth. His chest, which should have been pierced by the king's sword, was now sealed by a large block of ice. If not for that block of ice, perhaps Medivh would have bled to death even faster. Medivh was indeed the strongest mage in the world. Perhaps Medivh, who had inherited Egwin's power as a guardian, would have a lifespan of hundreds or even thousands of years like his mother, but most people forgot that he was still immortal. Injuries hurt, and severe injuries could also kill. Oh no, I've brought a priest with me this time. I'll go look for him now. Despite knowing that the chances were slim, Lothar was unwilling to give up. Apart from being righteous, Lothar was also a person who valued friendship. After confirming that Medivh was no longer the demon that harmed the world, he quickly regarded Medivh as his closest partner. The evil deeds that Medivh did when he was possessed were all forgotten by Lothar. There's no need for that. Medivh suddenly stretched out his left hand to grab Lothar's arm. My biggest injury is the collapse of my magic circuit. At this time, even the creation titans can't save me. The surrounding air suddenly became deathly silent. Medivh continued to speak in a weak voice. Ando will remember to thank Duque. If not for his fatal blow, I would never have had the chance to get my body back. If not for Duque stopping at the crucial moment, I wouldn't even have been able to free myself to protect you after knocking Sargeras down into the bottomless abyss. Not to mention the time we have left to reminisce about the past. Lothar choked with sobs. He quietly sobbed while holding on to Medivh's skinny hands. At this moment, there was no Azeroth Lion, no Stormwind Commander, and no World Guardian. There was only a pair of good friends who were about to be separated forever. Idiot, do you think I'm the kind of person who's unreasonable and emotional? Alright then, I'll arrange things first. Medivh beckoned to the void with his more intact right hand. Duque, come here for a moment. Stepping on the rubble, Duque's figure appeared in front of Medivh and Lothar. Duque's mood was very complicated. For a player, this was undoubtedly the time to defeat the boss and obtain the reward. But as a transmigrator, he knew that there was a high chance that the secret of his immortality had been seen through by Medivh. Because he had been directly resurrected behind Medivh, who was under Sargeras' control. As long as Medivh still had his memories, the disappearance of the corpse, the mysterious flowing light that surpassed magical power, and the sudden appearance of a complete body, it was impossible to hide from Medivh. What if Medivh were to bite back? Perhaps he would no longer be able to establish a foothold in the entire Azeroth human world. Mutants. A mysterious life form similar to a demon. Thinking of all the possibilities, Duque felt a chill in his heart. The problem was that he didn't even have the chance to flip the table and kill Medivh in advance. As early as when he was looking through the battle records, he saw the words Egwin. Now, the previous guardian Egwin, the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, and the Writing Priestess, who was actually one of the leaders of the Night Elves, Tyrant Whisperwind, such a large group of powerful people were all outside Karazhan. Why would he flip the table? Duque was uneasy. Seeing through Duque's uneasiness, Medivh smiled. It was the smile of a kind elder. No need to hesitate, my child. Everyone has their own secrets. You were able to obtain the approval of Soradin and the other ancient kings, and used that sword to stab me to death when I was possessed by Sargeras. This has already proven your heart. Believe me, Lothar and I will take this secret of yours to the grave. Even the torture of your soul won't be able to get anything out of it. If anyone finds out in the future, you can say that I taught you a little trick. When Medivh said this, Lothar suddenly raised his head and nodded at Duque with a resolute gaze. Duque secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Mediva's smile was still bright. No one could tell that this was a person whose heart had been completely crushed and was only relying on a small magic circuit to temporarily maintain his life. From the first time I saw you, I knew that you weren't from Stormwind. I originally thought that if not for you, I would still have Khadgar. Unfortunately, Khadgar has become like this. Mediv handed Duque a white bead. Duque said, "This is... Sargeras killed Khadgar, this is his soul." Mediv coughed hard and spat out a large mouthful of blood. Lothar didn't say a word. He took off his gauntlet and used his sleeve to wipe Mediva's blood. Mediv continued, "Resurrecting the dead is a forbidden area. But in Karazhan, Khadgar's soul should be able to help you. What I mean is, if you promise to protect the humans in Azeroth for me, I will give you Karazhan in one piece. In addition to Karazhan, there's also this." Looking at the piece of broken wood that was carved into the shape of a chicken leg, Duque's pupils suddenly shrank. It was the head of the super magic artifact, Atish, legendary staff of the Guardian. Of course I have my own selfish motives. Karazhan is a place of opportunity, but also a place of danger. There are astral rifts everywhere, and I'm afraid that the Burning Legion will use this place to invade Azeroth. So, as the price for you to have 1,280,000 magic books in Karazhan and this path to becoming the strongest mage, your soul will forever be linked to Karazhan. Are you willing to accept Karazhan? Chapter 136. Karazhan. Just hearing this grand name was enough to make Duque's heart skip a beat. It was not only because Karazhan was the most popular, unique, and popular dungeon in the game before Duque's transmigration, but also because of Karazhan's own value and status. Needless to say, more than 1 million magic books were a shocking fortune to any force on the continent. Not to mention more than 1 million books, even 100 books were enough to set off a bloodbath outside. With these magic books, and with the help of the system, it could be said that the biggest obstacle on Duque's path to becoming a supreme mage had been removed. And Karazhan's status was transcendent. To the north was the Dalajan, and to the south was Karazhan. This was the current situation in the field of magic on the entire continent. Karazhan, which Mediv controlled, was enough to compete with the Dalajan, which had thousands of mages. This was because of the books and special experimental conditions in Karazhan, and also because of Karazhan's insane magic defense ability. This time, it was not Duque cheating. Just the automatic magic defense system of the Mage Tower could reduce the number of red dragons in this world by at least 1/3. And this was the most idealistic estimate. If Duque had been in control from the beginning, if he was really ruthless, it was estimated that other than the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, no red dragon would have been able to escape alive. The most important thing was, of course, the astral rift in Karazhan. No one knew better than Duque how history would develop in the future. Draenor, or what the people of Azeroth called Outland, or what the orcs called Our World. This planet, inhabited by orcs and Draenei, was absolutely an obstacle that could not be avoided. Thinking of the war that would break out in the future, if possible, Duque absolutely did not want to completely rely on this dark portal that had been dug into the ground as his only lifeline in the future. There was no reason to refuse, be it public or private. The only thing that made Duque hesitate was Mediva's words, "Your soul will forever be linked to Karazhan." Something like an earthbound spirit or something, it sounded so terrible that it could die. However, Duque's hesitation was relieved by a series of explanations from the system elf. Congratulations on successfully assisting Mediv in banishing the souls of the Lord of the Burning Legion, the Fallen Titan, and the Demon King Sargeras into the Endless Abyss. Your personal reputation with Mediv, Lothar, and Aegwynn is worship. Your reputation in the Red Dragon Army is worship. The Mediv wants to give you all of Karazhan. In exchange, you will be bound to the highest level of soul with the Karazhan Mage Tower. You will not be able to own any other mage tower. You will no longer be accepted by any mage organization. Highest soul binding. If you are unfortunate enough to lose your life forever, unless your soul is bound by a supreme power that surpasses the entire Karazhan mana pool, your lost soul will automatically be absorbed back into Karazhan and continue to rule Karazhan in some form. Karazhan, demigod-level mage tower. In the entire world of Azeroth, it has the strongest magic defense ability, second only to the city of mages Dalajan. Low-level crossplane attack ability. It controls 12 astral rifts that lead to an unknown world. It comes with a demigod-level mana pool, damaged. Karazhan Library contains 28 million magic books. Although most of them are books on magical creatures, magic phenomena, unknown creatures, environments, and other information, one thing is certain. There are all the magic books you need to train until you become a Breaking Dawn mage. More details of Karazhan are unknown. You will need to discover them yourself, host. Mediva's inheritance. Mediv knows that he will die, and he hopes to give his inheritance to you. Only by accepting his inheritance can you fully possess Karazhan. In addition to the Karazhan Mage Tower, you must also accept the following things. Mediva's integrity, human nature. Mediva's seed of prayer. Atish, Guardian's legendary staff. Mediva's integrity. Without the interference of Sardra's will, Mediv is a true saint. He possessed a heart of compassion and compassion that surpassed that of ordinary people. Inheriting his integrity will allow your human nature to surpass your original upper limit. You may do a lot of saintly actions from time to time, but you can use your will to forcefully suppress it. Or you can deliberately lose your soul to let your human nature return to a reasonable range. Mediva's seed of prayer. Mediv has loved the world of Azeroth and Stormwind all his life. He doesn't want to see you harm Stormwind, so when you receive his inheritance, a spiritual seed will be planted in you. As long as you don't become a heinous demon, the seed will only benefit you. Once you choose to join an evil organization such as the Burning Legion, the seed will take action against your soul. Please find out for yourself the specific situation. Atish, the legendary staff of the Guardian epic-level remodeling quest released. This artifact staff with immense power has not disappeared. Because Mediv used its power to force Sargeras into the abyss, this artifact exploded into more than 40 pieces. If you can successfully collect all the pieces of the staff, you will have the opportunity to own this unique artifact staff in Azeroth. After reading through all the requirements and prohibitions in one breath, Duke felt a weight lifted off his shoulders. Mediv didn't cheat him, and he could be said to be kind. As long as Duke didn't run to the Burning Legion or the Scourge Legion, and didn't start a massacre in Stormwind, Mediv wouldn't have any means to restrict him. At this moment, the withered face of the world's greatest wizard, who was about to pass away, suddenly smiled, and 2 lines of tears rolled down his cheeks. Duke, from the moment I first saw you, I knew you would be an unfettered powerhouse who soared in the sky and ruled over the earth. I never thought about using morality or power to bind you. Even when I was secretly influenced by Sargeras, I never had such a thought. But, Duke, have you thought about it? The greater the power, the greater the responsibility. It seems that if a talented and capable person like you doesn't stand up, Azeroth will definitely perish. When Duke heard this, his heart suddenly shrank. He didn't know why, but a sour feeling welled up in his nose. Mediv continued, even if you're not from Stormwind. At least I hope you remember that there was once a Stormwind city that provided you with the soil to grow. Remember that there were countless brave people who fought alongside you. They all hoped that the kingdom would survive. They hoped that this beautiful and fertile land would no longer be ravaged by evil. Chapter 137. Duke, I'm begging you to. Lothar couldn't help it anymore and spoke with red eyes. Duke stared blankly at the dying Mediv, and also at Lothar, the Lion of Azeroth who was about to cry in front of him. In his impression, Anduin Lothar was a hero with infinite loyalty and courage. Even when his country was destroyed, even when his 2 childhood friends died one after another, even when his own son died on the battlefield, he never showed his weak side. He was still like a flag, leading the Stormwind, leading the 7 kingdoms, and even leading the entire alliance to victory in the future. Lothar was a hero with an iron will that would never admit defeat. However, the current Lothar was no longer the strong image in history, but it gave Duque a more realistic feeling. This was the living Medivh and Lothar. This was the real Stormwind. This was the Azeroth that countless heroes forged with blood and fire. Duque nodded gently. There's no need to say anything. I will fulfill your wish. I will inherit your will. I once told His Majesty Rin, if the destruction of Stormwind is inevitable, then I will change it for you personally. Now, although I haven't completely done it, I believe that with our efforts, the future of this kingdom's destruction has begun to be reversed. If inheriting your power and wisdom and fighting for the survival and hope of all mankind is my fate, then my choice is to accept. When Duque finished speaking in one breath, both Lothar and Medivh trembled as if they had been electrocuted. Medivh gently pressed on Duque's hand. Duque, as the new master of Karazhan, can you please bring in a few old friends from outside? I can still hold on for a while. Although the circulation of mana in the temporary magic circuit in Medivh's body was getting weaker and weaker, it seemed that what Medivh said was true. Duque decisively took over part of the authority that Medivh had handed over and opened the barrier of the mage tower that was still in operation in Karazhan. Medivh's voice rang outside the tower. Mother and a few of my old friends outside, could you come in for a moment? The few mighty figures outside the Magus Tower who were nervously observing the situation exchanged a glance. The Red Dragon Queen flapped her wings and carried Aegwynn and Tyrande up. Several minutes later, not only the three of them, but also Windsor and some of the remaining soldiers arrived at Medivh's side. People surrounded the city in a dense mass. Aegwynn, on the other hand, knelt on the ground and hugged her son, letting Medivh's head rest on her thigh. Even though 800 years had forged her strong and firm will, at this moment, she was just the mother of a child, no different from the millions of mothers in the world. Ignoring his mother's tears, Medivh spoke in a weak voice. I, Medivh, former guardian of Azeroth, chief archmage of the royal court of Stormwind, declare in front of all the ladies and gentlemen present that my last wish is to pass on the Karazhan Mage Tower and everything within it to Sir Duke Marcus. Beside him, Lothar, who was supported by Windsor, also spoke. I, Anduin Lothar, 7th leader of the Brotherhood of the Iron Horse, Sir Stormwind, commander of the Stormwind Royal Knights, hereby confirm Medivh's last wish. I will convey his last wish to His Majesty King Lang Rin. When His Majesty completes the confirmation, Karazhan will officially complete the transfer of fief. This moment was destined to be forever fixed in the memory of all the spectators. Time flew. After Hua Lao passed away, many of them would repeatedly think about everything that happened at this moment. The death of the strongest mage, guardian of Azeroth, Medivh, symbolized the end of an era. And Duke Marcus's inheritance of Karazhan symbolized the beginning of a new era. Under the witness of so many people, Medivh used his weak fingers to draw an unknown symbol on Duque's palm. Duke could only feel that there was an endless amount of knowledge surging into his spiritual world like a tsunami. Perhaps at this moment, he still could not digest this knowledge, but Medivh had already very considerately helped him pack up and seal this knowledge. Before Duque reached the corresponding level, these spells that were too burdensome for the weak Duque would not be unsealed. In addition, there was also Karazhan. Similarly, a strange light lit up outside the whole of Karazhan. The huge Karazhan was becoming transparent and illusory. Medivh activated a magic device that could still work and began to pull the whole of Karazhan into a certain void. Time passed quietly, and everyone in the workshop quietly watched the great mage walk towards the end of his life. Even though everyone now knew that Medivh was the one who opened the dark portal and led the orcs into Azeroth, they couldn't hate this guardian who used all his strength to send Sargeras into the abyss in the last moments of his life. There was not too much pain and there was no regret. Medivh, who was in his 40s, was held in his mother's arms. He quietly closed his eyes as Aegwynn hummed an unknown lullaby. After dozens of seconds, the last magic circuit in Medivh's body stopped. The god of magic, Medivh, smiled and passed away. After a full 10 seconds, after confirming that Medivh had passed away, Lothar and Duque bowed to all the spectators at the same time. Duque said, "Thank you for watching. Now, please leave. In 5 minutes, Karazhan will temporarily disappear from the world of Azeroth. It won't be back in a short time." The Red Dragon Queen and Tyrant were the first to leave. These two important figures nodded in unison and left. Alexstrasza jumped out of the workshop. In the blink of an eye, a red light flashed, and she transformed from the sexy female warrior in bikini armor into a giant dragon that was dozens of meters long. She spread her wings and soared, and with a flap of her wings, she flew far away. Tyrant whistled, and a huge white tiger completely ignored gravity. It ran on the almost vertical outer wall of the Mage Tower in Karazhan. Tyrant sat down gracefully, and the white tiger let out a long roar before running down the vertical Mage Tower in an equally illogical manner. Lothar and Windsor were the second to leave. Lothar asked, "You seem to be staying in Karazhan for a while. Do you have anything to say?" Duque thought for a moment. "If there are no accidents, Stormwind City can hold out for a long time. But if it really can't, then retreat to Alterac or Rapid Hold. I have prepared everything." Chapter 138. Windsor looked at Duque, hesitating to speak. Duque spoke first. "I've proven myself. Now it's time for you to prove yourself." With that, Duque threw the King's Protector to Windsor. "Its name is the King's Protector," Duque said with a double meaning. Windsor's body trembled. He stood at attention, holding the sword in his left hand and punching his chest with his right. "I, Reginald Windsor, swear on my life that I will not let you down." Lothar frowned. "Duque, is there anything I need to know?" Duque didn't want to say it at first, but looking at Lothar's sincere and frank eyes, he still said, "Didn't you notice that we're missing someone?" "Garona." Lothar was speechless. In fact, Lothar had already noticed that Garona was missing. It should be said that Garona had been missing since Medivh caused the big explosion. Before Medivh died, he had personally told Lothar that he had also used magic to protect Garona. This gave Lothar a bad feeling. Medivh himself didn't have the memory of Sargeras dealing with Garona. He didn't know what Sargeras had done to Garona. Now that Duque had reminded him, Lothar was extremely vigilant. "You're saying that Garona is a traitor?" "I don't have any evidence. I just suspect that Garona is likely to be another Medivh. Remember, in a war, unless you have the ability to change the entire situation with your own strength like Medivh. Otherwise, your strength will be infinitely weakened. But it's in times like this that the importance of a leader is even greater." "Leader? Who else could it be?" Duque was clearly referring to King Lang. In Lothar's heart, even if Lothar died, there were still young people like Bolvar and Duque who could replace him. One had to know that Lang was the true pillar in the hearts of the people of Stormwind. However, because Lang was rebellious when he was young, he married very late. Lang had no siblings, so his only heir was Prince Varian Rin, who was less than 10 years old. As long as Lang died, Stormwind would definitely collapse. Lothar bit his lips hard. Medivh's death was an eternal pain in his heart. Now there's Garona? Although Noxus had a good impression of this straightforward and pure half-orc woman, it was at most the level of an ordinary friend. In that instant, Lothar almost had the thought of killing Garona the moment he saw her. Duque, however, put a hand on Lothar's shoulder, his eyes glowing. "Lothar, don't forget your knight's oath. Besides, I have no proof. But don't worry, I've already prepared a backup plan. Perhaps His Majesty Lang would die one day, but he would not die at the hands of Garona. I swear." Thinking of his knight's oath, Lothar was infuriated. "All right, I'll keep an eye on her. I swear I won't kill a kind-hearted woman unjustly. But I also swear to protect my king." Duque smiled. "That's enough." Duque sighed inwardly. Aegwynn had just lost her son, so she definitely wouldn't want to lose her grandson as well. Just like in history, Garona, who had been sullied by Sargeras and Medivh, should now be pregnant with Medivh's child. Garona really didn't know whether to kill her or not. She was like a ticking time bomb. Lothar gave Duque a big hug. "Come back when you're done." The future of Stormwind depends on you young people. Looking at Lothar, who had white hair at his temples, Duque was speechlessly touched. Without Mediva's father Alan and Lothar risking their lives to block Sargeras' curse before his death, and without Mediva's early rise, perhaps Khadgar's fate in history would have been his, Duque's. His hair was all white, and his skin was all wrinkled. Just thinking about it was terrifying. What was worse was that this was a curse on both life and soul, and it couldn't be removed at all. Even though Khadgar went to the Dreniai's Shotrath city to study the holy light and train in seclusion, he still couldn't get rid of this curse after he came out and became an archmage. In comparison, he had only gone from a mere 14 or 15-year-old teenager to an 18 or 19-year-old youth. This was already the luckiest of the luckiest. After sending off Lothar, Windsor, and the others, as well as Aegwin, who was holding Mediva's body, left, Duque suddenly realized that he was the only living person left in Karazhan. It was a little scary. But there was no turning back. Duque could feel that a part of his soul had begun to fuse with the entirety of Karazhan. Of course, when Mediv had given him the inheritance, Duque had played a small trick. He had used the system elf to simulate a soul shell and let Mediv brand the inheritance on this shell. If something were to happen, not only would this outer shell help him filter it to a certain extent, but if he really couldn't handle it, Duke could still die once and throw away all of Mediva's inheritance like he had lost his moral integrity. Looking at the empty workshop, Duque let out a long sigh of relief. He could finally calm down and quietly count his gains. First was the soul. Soul power 385, humanity 230%. As the host's humanity limit is 100%, under normal circumstances, the host will operate at 100%. Under special circumstances, the host will act like a saint. Seeing this, Duque bared his teeth. All right, moral integrity can also be inherited. I've resigned myself to this world where moral integrity is lost and moral integrity picked up. Next was the magic inheritance. You've obtained the advancement method for sky wizards from Mediva's soul seed. Sky wizards use themselves as a radiation source, greatly changing the types and flow of elements in a wide area. This greatly increases one's own mana absorption and release to suppress the enemy. You need to learn and master the following knowledge: wide area space element theory, elemental repulsion and elemental affinity, wide area space elemental circulation experiment guide. A total of 37 knowledge. Before you successfully reach the peak of Sky Wizard, all knowledge related to Morningstar Wizards will be sealed. Duque's face turned pale. He did not think that he would be a research animal after transmigrating from a university. Lastly was Karazhan. You are currently soul binding with the demigod wizard Takarazhan. Before you completely control Karazhan, you cannot leave Karazhan in any form. You need to reprogram or rewrite the entire defense and surveillance systems of Karazhan. Also, because Mediv passed away in a hurry, many of the seals in dangerous areas were not completed. Please quickly deal with these 108 knowledge after learning Introduction to Space, Construction of Spatial Tunnel Models, 100 questions on how to deal with spatial crevices, and so on. At this moment, Duque's face turned blue. Chapter 139. There was a famous saying in this world: although the brother is not here, the legend of the brother is everywhere. Although Duque could not return to Stormwind City in time, Duque's heroic deeds had begun to spread through the mouths of other people who participated in the raid, as well as the official bulletin of Stormwind City. Of course, the official version was embellished. The general content was that the Guardian Mediv was ambushed and trapped by the demon king Sargeras. Then the head of the Royal Knights, Sir Anduin Lothar, together with Sir Duke Marcus, raided Karazhan, which was once occupied by the demons. In the end, together with the rescued Mediv, they worked together to send the demon king into the bottomless abyss, and Duque made the final blow. In the process of killing the demon king, the Great Guardian and the Chief Court Archmage, Sir Mediv, was unfortunately killed. With the approval of King Lang Rin, the fief of Karazhan was transferred to Sir Duke Marcus, who had made outstanding contributions in this attack, and Sir Marcus was promoted to Viscount. Hey, have you heard? That Sea King Duke Marcus actually killed the boss of the demons, Sargeras, at such a young age. I heard. He's really amazing. I thought he was very amazing in the past. At such a young age, he relied on himself to make such a big career. I didn't expect him to be so good at business, but also in the field of magic. He's more than amazing. He also predicted this war. Didn't you see that the javelin throwers he trained have become the regular army of the kingdom, enjoying the treatment of first-class soldiers? God, I know that kid Goritza. He was originally a little gangster fisherman. Now he has 8 orc kill medals in his hands. Yes, I heard that the ones who killed the most were not the regular army, but the javelin throwers. They were all brought out by Sir Marcus. People were naive, and their impression of Duque had unknowingly deviated. In the eyes of a transmigrator, this was a typical example of a skewed story. But people paid more attention to things that were right in front of them, such as the orcs. People would only understand Duque from the things they came into contact with on a daily basis, and not from the exaggerated stories that were exaggerated in the taverns. They only knew that the only lifeline of the kingdom, the sea, was maintained by Duque's fleet. Now, the ones who killed the most enemies were the harpooneers trained by Duque. Well, people selectively ignored the shield beastmen who were charging at them. They also forgot that the harpooneers were killing from the safety of the fortresses. Those small fortresses were also invented by Duque. Then, it was Duque's fleet and the Naga warriors under Duque's command who risked their lives to enter the inland river to pick up the refugees and return to Stormwind City. People were curious about these large but friendly male Naga warriors. Even if these Nagas did not have a good temper towards humans, a life-saving grace was a life-saving grace. No matter how vicious the Nagas were, they could not change this fact. Once they fell into the river, even the strongest orc would not dare to say that they could defeat a Naga. This was not the first time the Horde had encountered such a situation. Heroic orc warriors rushed into the shallow water that did not even reach their knees in order to kill humans. In the end, the Naga did not fight the orcs at all. They waved their long snake tails and wrapped around the orc's leg, dragging the orc into the deep water and drowning him. What they got was the cheers of the refugees on the ships and the ugly expression of the orc commander. No matter which it was, the name Duke Marcus filled every aspect of people's lives. For a time, Duque became even more famous than King Lang. It's Viscount Duque's proposal again. He wants to organize the javelin cavalry in the western wilderness. It does not require much equipment, just a horse and training in javelin throwing. Even a farmer who only knows how to ride a horse can complete the preliminary training in 10 days. Lang looked at the report handed over by Makarov, who had become almost the full agent in Duque's absence, and suddenly smiled. It was not clear whether it was a smile of admiration or a bitter smile at Duque's evilness. In terms of war, Viscount Duque also seems to have amazing foresight. Bolvar Fedigan said in a manner that did not provoke the nobles in the hall, "We must face up to a problem, and that is the loss of food. Although we can get food supplies from Alterac and Torrential Castle, the wet sea and various losses add up to a pound of wheat lost on the road. This is the result of our sailors' efforts to save it." Is that so? There was a low uproar among the nobles. When had the high and mighty nobles ever cared about such things? Only after losing their territory and placing themselves under the protection of Lang did they begin to care about such things. Bolvar's voice grew louder, but last year, someone spent a lot of money to organize mercenaries to clear out most of the monsters in the western wilderness. After losing 70% of the territory in the Elven Forest, the western wilderness has become the kingdom's largest production area. After the summer harvest, the western wilderness's summer grain this year is enough for the 500,000 refugees in Stormwind City to get through the following winter. And for every 100 pounds of grain shipped from the western wilderness by sea, there is only a loss of 5 to 6 pounds at most. Wow! This time, the nobles cried out in an exaggerated manner. At this moment, Lang stood up. "Well, there is no need for a vote on this proposal, I agree." "Why do you always agree to Marcus' proposal?" A former border count among the nobles muttered in a voice that was neither too loud nor too soft. Lang's eyes turned cold. Because it is correct. Because it is beneficial to the kingdom and the people, I listen. If anyone has an opinion, you can put forward a more reasonable and effective proposal. I am also here to listen. If someone's 100 proposals are correct, then I don't mind listening to 100 proposals in one go. The nobles' complaints were actually based on the loss of power. King Lang used his courage to suppress everything. Lang's eyes were so clear, his face so resolute. In Lothar's eyes, history surprisingly overlapped, and his slightly blurred vision outlined an old picture full of historical feeling. In the picture, Thoradin the Great's last son was abandoned in the desolate Rapidstream castle, and then he and his last supporter led the people all the way to the southern part of the continent, all the way to the current Stormwind city, and almost built Stormwind from scratch. 1,000 years had passed, and many nobles had fallen into corruption. Lothar rejoiced. When the glorious impression of the late king was about to fade forever, at the moment of national calamity, the majestic figure of a young king overlapped with that of the late king. Lang Rin, a wise and great king. It was because of him that Stormwind still stood tall. While he was lost in thought, the voices in the council hall seemed to have been sucked out. For some reason, Garona, who was describing the strength of the tribe to the nobles and King Lang according to the scout's report, suddenly flashed her dagger. Chapter 140. Speaking of the participants in the Karazhan raid, Garona returned to Stormwind City before Lothar. Lang had always been puzzled about this. After Garona came back in a daze, Lang repeatedly asked about the situation, only to find that Garona's memory only lasted until she was knocked unconscious by Sardra's fear. Lang and Bolvar didn't blame Garona too much. On the battlefield, even the bravest knight might not be able to withstand fear. If it was before the incident at the Dark Portal, Lang and Bolvar would have regarded Garona as a deserter. But now, countless battles had proven that if one didn't have a particularly strong will or skill, there was no way one could be immune to this thing. Moreover, when Garona returned, Lang had already received news that Lothar was injured but was fine, as well as that Duque was fine. In addition, with the news of Mediva's passing, Lang really didn't have much time to think about Garona since one of his childhood friends was dead and the other was injured. Because of that battle, although Lothar wasn't seriously injured, he injured his leg. Not only did he sprain his ankle, but in fact, during the big explosion caused by Mediv, the protective shield used by Mediv wasn't complete, and there were still several pieces of gravel that pierced into Lothar's injured leg. In the end, even though Lothar was burning with anxiety, no one dared to let Lothar ride the bumpy griffin. In addition, with Lang's strict orders, Lothar could only bitterly return in a carriage. Coupled with the changes in the battle situation, the front line in the Elven Forest was constantly moving towards Stormwind City. Lothar and his party had to go from east to west, almost crossing the entire Twilight Forest before turning north to return to Stormwind City. The poor vision in the Twilight Forest also greatly delayed the return of Lothar and his party. By the time Lothar rushed back to Stormwind City without much rest, they were already a full month later than Garona. Seeing Garona standing beside Lang, Lothar suddenly remembered what Duque said. As a half-orc, Garona did not have the right to enter the core of power in Stormwind. In Lothar's previous message, Lothar vaguely reminded Lang to be wary of Garona. He also secretly sent a message to his men to keep an eye on Garona. Garona was too harmless, but Garona's information was too important. When it came to the tribe, humans were completely clueless. Many military matters were related to her. Lang had also tried isolating Garona and sending someone to ask her if anything happened. Garona wasn't annoyed and answered every question. The problem was that the military situation was urgent. For example, the battle prowess of the various orc clans could be said to be uneven. For example, the Blackstone and Warsong clans were definitely ferocious. Not only were their individual soldiers strong, but they also had a large number of people. When the Beastmen invaded, they would often send out troops in units of clans. The second-tier clans were much worse off, such as the Thunder King clan. The unknown third-tier clans were even worse. They were behind in all aspects, in terms of numbers, equipment, and basic battle prowess. The difference in battle prowess might be a first-tier clan warrior fighting 10 human soldiers, but when it came to the third tier, it would be 1 to 3. However, not only were the orc military flags ugly, they were all F*** handmade. With one slip of the hand, the flag of the same clan could be turned into several totems. In addition, the art lessons of the scouts were taught by the physical education teacher. With mistakes piled on top of mistakes, it was naturally easy for things to go wrong when they arrived at the command post in the rear. Lang and the senior generals had been screwed over more than once by such trivial matters. The most serious time was when they almost filled in an elite army that had been formed before the war. It was different with Garona. No matter what kind of scribbles it was, she could recognize which clan it was at a glance. She could tell the characteristics of the clan, the number of people, and the battle prowess in one go. In the eyes of many officers, Garona was simply a treasure house given by the heavens to Stormwind. Even if they fought and retreated, and lost every battle, at least their losses were reduced. In Duque's suggestion left behind by Makarov, there was another time when it was summer, when the weather was dry, and they sent a suicide squad on horseback to burn down the East Cove lumberyard. This fire was awesome. They burned down 3,000 elites of the Blackrock clan, and the price that Stormwind City paid was only 5 suicide soldiers. As time passed, Garona had unknowingly become an important minister of the kingdom, and she would definitely participate in every military conference. Especially when the Horde conquered Goldflash Town, the gateway to Stormwind City, and was about to reach Stormwind City, the military conferences were held more frequently. This time, the military conference looked no different from any other military conference in the past. The only difference was that Prince William, accompanied by the Queen, listened quietly at the side. Originally, Lang was against William's participation in the military conference. However, the Queen's words made Lang change his mind. William is already 10 years old. In my opinion, this war with the orcs will continue for a long time. In 5 or 10 years' time, can you guarantee that you will still be able to command the army like you do now? Can you guarantee that the next king of the people of Stormwind will be a good king who knows how to use troops? Lang fell silent. Mortals would eventually grow old. Faith would be passed down from generation to generation. If this was an era of peace, Lang probably wouldn't let children be exposed to such things at such an early age. However, this was an era of war, and even Lang himself didn't know when he would have to personally go to the battlefield. Swords had no eyes, and no one could guarantee that they would come back alive every time they went to the battlefield. Once he died, Stormwind would need a new king. All right, you've convinced me. On this day, Prince William was very excited. Even though he was well educated and sat quietly in his seat, his eyes would sweep over Lothar from time to time. William especially admired Lothar, not only because Lothar had taught him swordsmanship, but also because of Lothar's various legendary stories. His burning gaze made Lothar feel uncomfortable several times during the military conference. He was also curious about Garona. His father and mother often came into contact with this amazing female half-orc and often mentioned her good qualities. However, for safety reasons, he didn't have many opportunities to interact with Garona. The military conference was a little boring to William. A group of generals were arguing over something, and everyone insisted on their own opinions. Then, Anduin and Bolvar would express their opinions, and finally, Lang would summarize everyone's opinions and make the final decision. At this moment, Garona suddenly looked like she had a headache. She suddenly covered her head with one hand and pressed the other on the military sand table. "What's wrong?" Lang asked with concern. In the next moment, a cold glint flashed in the eyes of everyone at the military conference table. Because of Lothar's insistence, there were always 2 fully armed royal guards by Lang's side at all times. When the cold glint flashed, the guard who was sandwiched between Lang and Garona reacted quickly. He had been staring at Garona intentionally or unintentionally, so his reaction was the fastest. Chapter 141. He had 2 swords, one was a standard long sword, and the other was a short sword for close combat. At this moment, he pulled out the short sword. If he had a third of a second, He could have unsheathed the sword and stood in front of the king. However, it was too fast. Garona's figure turned into a flash of green light. The cold light flashed. It was just a horizontal slash, but he couldn't dodge it. Even his movements and thoughts couldn't keep up. An amazing killing skill. Speed, angle, strength. They were all marvelous to the extreme. Chi! A red arrow of blood spurted out from the guard's throat. One had to know that the Imperial Guards were fully armed. The full helmet was only in the shape of a T. The horizontal gap was convenient for a wide field of vision. The vertical gap was convenient for breathing. There was almost no angle between the helmet and the breastplate. In fact, there was only a gap of less than 3 millimeters. But this gap was caught. It was a one-hit kill. There was no luck. No one reacted. Garona flashed past the guard and appeared in front of Lang. Ryan couldn't help but be stunned. To be honest, Lang was not weak. In fact, the moment he saw the cold light, he had already reacted. But the moment he saw Garona's face, he was stunned. What kind of a face was that? In Clayton's imagination, this kind of assassination where the dagger was revealed, the assassin should be fierce and vicious. It was either filled with unparalleled hatred, or it was filled with a coldness that viewed life as worthless, or it was, Lang thought of many possibilities. In fact, after Lothar vaguely reminded him, he more or less kept an eye on Garona. However, Ryan had never thought that Garona would have such an expression on her face. With helplessness and despair, with love for humans, and even with love for Lang. No, it was a more direct love. It was under this expression that Garona's body quickly waved the dagger and stabbed at Lang. Lang was stunned. He was not only a wise king, he was also a kind king. Just like Lothar, Lang had also taken the oath of a knight. He really could not bear to draw his sword on a woman who did not want to hurt him, even if she was a half-orc. In a flash, Lang's eyes revealed such a look. Why do you want to kill me? Did I do something wrong? Garona responded with a helpless, unwilling and despairing look. No, I don't want to kill you. But I lost control of my body. What? After Lang understood Garona's gaze, he realized that he should draw his sword. Because it was a military conference in the heart of the kingdom, in the storm fort. He wasn't wearing any armor. His sword was the only thing he could depend on. The speed at which Lang drew his sword was not slow. However, in this moment of hesitation, he was still half a step too slow. Time seemed to have frozen because of this terrifying and complicated assassination. William looked at his father, who was about to be stabbed to death, in horror. He couldn't understand why that hateful half-orc would use a weapon against his father. Lothar was also half a step too slow. It takes 100 days to recover from an injury, was a description of his current condition. Even though he had received the best treatment from the priest immediately after leaving Karazhan, his leg was still not completely healed. This was because a large amount of chaotic magical energy had been injected into his leg. Although this energy was not fatal, it would take a certain amount of time for it to dissipate. So Lothar immediately drew his sword, but could not rush over in time. King Lang Rin, the true pillar of Stormwind, was about to lose his life at the hands of his trusted Garona. Seeing that the orcs were about to attack Stormwind City, the people of Stormwind were about to lose their king. Seeing that another wise king was about to fall under a despicable and shameless assassination. Then, an unexpected person made a move. Reginald Windsor. As the representative of Viscount Duke Marcus, and as the mouthpiece of the important minister of the kingdom who was temporarily unable to attend, Windsor was allowed to participate in the military conference. In addition, he was once a direct subordinate of Lang, so the king allowed Windsor to carry a weapon into the conference. Interestingly, almost everyone knew the name of the one-handed sword that Windsor had obtained from Duque. King's Protector. On this day, at this minute, at this second, the King's Protector showed its glory. Assist, a special skill that allows a slow-witted class like the warrior to feel a little more graceful. The warrior here wasn't an ordinary warrior, but a warrior of the profession. Using a special power called Rage, warriors could perform many special skills that ordinary people could not. For example, this assist could allow a warrior to cross a certain distance and go forward to block the next attack for his chosen teammate. While everyone's eyes were attracted by Garona, no one noticed Windsor's move. The speed was as fast as an afterimage. The moment Windsor appeared, he used his scimitar-like Scarlet, King's Protector, and blocked Garona's killing dagger with a horizontal stance. What was interesting was that both the perpetrator and the victim showed a relieved expression at the same time. "Thank the heavens," Ryan and Garona said with the same expression on their faces. But in the next moment, Garona's expression turned into one of shock. Her figure disappeared from the spot again. Shadow Step, a special rogue technique that allowed the rogue to appear behind the victim in an instant. Seeing that Garona's first attack had failed, she attacked again. This time, not only did Lang pull out his sword and turn around, but Lothar and the royal guard on Lang's right also arrived. The royal guard abruptly dodged to the side, almost using his own flesh and blood to forcefully squeeze himself between the half-turning Clayan and the dagger. Garona's Epictear dagger easily cut through the muscles on the royal guard's arm. At that moment, Lothar arrived. With the same simple slash, Lothar's king's sword turned into a dazzling arc of light and slashed at Garona's arm. Arg! Unexpectedly, Lothar did not even hit Garona. Instead, Garona let out a blood-curdling scream. A black aura visible to the naked eye emerged from Garona's back, and one could vaguely see that it was a demonic ghost roaring. The strange cries of the evil demons seemed to contain some kind of terrifying power that shook the minds of those who heard them. The chilling evil aura had become accustomed to the entire council chamber like a storm. The demonic energy of this demon was so powerful that even Lothar's king's sword was slightly suppressed. A dazzling flash exploded under Garona's feet. That was flash powder, a must-have item for rogues to use invisibility. Garona disappeared, but before she disappeared, she threw out a total of 7 daggers. This time, there was nothing he could do. Because the royal guard had charged too hard, he had already fallen. At this moment, Lang was completely defenseless. Lang did his best, but he only managed to knock down 2 daggers. The remaining 5 were all stuck in Lang's chest. Arg! Lang let out a blood-curdling scream. Garona disappeared, and everyone quickly surrounded her. Just when everyone was panicking, they found that Lang, who should have been mortally wounded, was not bleeding at all. The next second, Lang sat up straight. Chapter 142. A moment ago, everyone was pale with fright. The next second, everyone's faces were filled with infinite surprise. "Your Majesty, are you all right?" "Father," the young William almost cried. "I'm fine." Not to mention the others, even Lang was still in a state of shock. Everyone's curiosity was about to explode. After all, Lang was not wearing armor. He was only wearing an incomparably gorgeous short shirt with gold edges and a white background, as well as an inner shirt. The queen, who ran over in a hurry, knelt down and gently tore open Lang's outer shirt, revealing the secret inside. Pairs of eyes widened as they stared at the inner shirt that actually resisted the dagger throw of a super-strong assassin. It was pure white like snow and exuded a faint cool aura. Noxus extended his hands, carefully put on thick gloves, and took off the daggers. He had to be careful because thieves were a profession that liked to use poison. Frostweb spider silk? Noxus was knowledgeable and recognized the material of the inner shirt. "It was given to me by Duke. He said it was Kevlar." Lang was still in a state of shock, and his mouth trembled. "I just think it's cool to wear." "Kevlar." Windsor came up and corrected him. "It was specially developed by Sir Marcus. It was woven with several magical materials, such as frostweb spider silk, in a special way. Its defensive power is even greater than that of chainmail." There was an uproar among the nobles. "So powerful." They all saw Lang's inner shirt. It was very light and very comfortable. They didn't expect it to have such powerful defensive power. After all, nobles could still protect themselves on the battlefield. Usually, it was a heavy iron armor on the outside, a chainmail made of interlocking iron rings in the middle, and a leather armor on the inside. Such a way of wearing it would definitely have great defensive power. However, it was midsummer and it was very hot. Often, after riding a horse around in the sun, one would feel as if he had been fished out of the water. Even if one wore the simplest leather armor, it would still be extremely hot. Now, Duque had actually invented such a light and high defensive shirt. This was really, no, even if I have to extort more money from that vampire, I have to get one back. This was the thought in every noble's mind. Lang heaved a long sigh. He looked at Windsor with a typical look of a survivor. Is it Duque's order again? Your Majesty is wise. Windsor sheathed his sword and lowered his head. If it wasn't for Duque's order, there was no way to explain Windsor's quick reaction. Windsor's reaction speed was even faster than Lothar's, who was vigilant day and night. With so many people around, Lang stood up and announced in a clear voice, I hereby announce that Duke Marcus is promoted to count for his meritorious service in rescuing the Emperor. And Reginald Windsor was made a knight. As soon as he said this, everyone cheered His Majesty's wisdom. Why was Duque only promoted to Viscount after killing the demonized Medivh? Wasn't it because a bunch of nobles were obstructing him? He gave a lot of reasons, saying that young people were spoiled, and said that Duke's background was unknown. Now, even though Duque wasn't around, Duque's products and Duque's men still came to the rescue. There was no reason to refute, so they could only pinch their noses and accept it. Who asked you to not have the ability to rescue the Emperor at the first instance? Since ancient times, this kind of meritorious service was the fastest way to get promoted. Moreover, now that the Orc army was at the city gates, they needed Lang's leadership and rallying power even more. No one would make things difficult for them at this time. Looking at everyone praising Duke, the young William's eyes lit up like a starry-eyed groupie. Unknowingly, this Duke Marcus, who wasn't much older than him, had already become another idol in William's heart. Today, be it the Orc's capriciousness or Duque's strategizing and ability to control the situation from 1,000 miles away, they both left a very deep impression on William. William couldn't compare Uncle Anduin, whom he admired the most, to Duke. That was because the two of them were completely different types of heroes. Anduin was valiant and full of manliness. He was brave, decisive, and determined. He would never lose confidence and courage at any time, inspiring everyone around him. On the other hand, Duque was wise and resourceful. He was proficient in business, invention, and battle strategies. He was full of mysterious aura and powerful magic. He didn't lose his courage either. Previously, someone had said that Anduin Lothar and Duke Marcus were like two walls in a stormwind. William didn't believe it at first, but from today onwards, he made a small decision. At this moment, what was Duque, who had unknowingly been pushed to the peak of the storm, doing? Unfortunately, he was bickering. What the hell? Why are you so stupid? Oh my God, how did you become an earth mage? Even a Dalajan apprentice who isn't even 10 years old has learned this basic magic knowledge. How can you not know? Yes. I'm a rogue mage from an unorthodox background. Teacher Khadgar, please teach me well. Bright light gathered from all directions. Strands and strands of light intertwined to form a blue, semi-illusory human figure. Arcane energy gushed out from the magic circle beside Duke, and in an instant, the entire human figure was filled to the brim. This person, who was still a little translucent, used his right hand to remove his hood, revealing a rather young face. He was the former secret agent of the Tirisful Council, the apprentice of Medivh and Khadgar, who would have become one of the strongest magic gods in the future if he hadn't died. Just as Medivh had said before his death, Khadgar was indeed a good helper. The first and simplest thing was that when the entirety of Karazhan was pulled into the void by Medivh's spell, the first thing Duque discovered was that he actually had no food. If the great hero who had killed Sargeras and inherited the legacy of the greatest mage in the world, Medivh, Duque starved to death in Karazhan, it would definitely be the biggest joke in all of Azeroth. The empty, lonely, and cold Duque almost drove himself crazy. Fortunately, he remembered that he still had Khadgar. Thus, after paying 5 soul power through the system elf, Khadgar came back to life, in a ghostly state similar to Aaron's shadow. Khadgar still had his own reason and could still cast spells. Unfortunately, all of his soul power had to be supplied by Duque. If Lord Duque was unhappy, it would only be a matter of minutes before he extinguished Khadgar's soul. Of course, Duque would not allow a talent like Khadgar to just disappear like that. Thus, after some inhumane bargaining, Khadgar became Duque's butler in Karazhan, a teacher in the field of magic, a hired thug and cannon fodder. To outsiders, Khadgar had to call Duque master. Internally, he still had to call Duque master. Alright, to a certain extent, Khadgar was no different from a slave beast. Chapter 143. How strong was Khadgar? It was hard to tell now, but in the future history, Khadgar was the hooligan who could instantly teleport hundreds of people, easily blow up bridges and dams, and was a master of ice, fire, and magic. He was the king of hooligans, the king of hooligans. Perhaps it was because he was too strong that countless of his teammates died. Actually, it should be said that Khadgar's enemies were very strong, but Khadgar was even stronger. However, his teammates were not strong, so Khadgar survived while most of his teammates died. So what was Khadgar doing now? Well, he was baking bread for Duque. There was nothing he could do about it. Because Windsor had led his troops to attack the lower two levels of Karazhan, Hunter Atumen and Butler Moros had turned the world upside down. In the end, most of the food reserves had been destroyed in this battle. There was not much food in Karazhan to begin with, and now there was even less. The only good thing was that Khadgar had been here for a long time and had struggled to survive for a long time. It was not wrong to say that he had struggled to survive. Karazhan was too big. The library alone had more than 28 million magic books, and that was not all. After taking over Karazhan, Duque found out that other than magic books, there were also more than 3 million books of various types. The library was the size of a football field, and there were as many as 3 digits. This was a very bad joke. Khadgar had once tried to eat, but because Butler Moros's servants could not find him, Khadgar had almost starved to death in the library. People were forced to do so. Khadgar had also been forced to learn the strange skill of hiding wheat, cutlery, or baked bread everywhere. As a library, and with the special spatial structure of Karazhan, every room was ventilated and dry. Khadgar had actually gone around a few times and found food that was not contaminated, enough for Duque to eat for a few months. However, there was no salt or oil, which made Duque want to die. "How many months have you been eating this?" Duque pointed at the things that could be called food. "No, I forgot how long I've been eating for. Anyway, I can read and fill my stomach," Khadgar replied. Duque's face fell. "As for you, Master Duque, I really don't understand you. Why are you so relaxed in areas that mortals can't do, but often get stuck on small mistakes that even a mage apprentice wouldn't make?" Khadgar found an oven to bake bread while watching Duque fiddle with the giant golem. "That's right. Why do you have to call this golem the curator? This is love. Feelings. Young man, understand? What kind of library has such a fierce librarian?" Khadgar muttered softly. There were far too many things that Khadgar could not understand. First of all, he didn't understand how Duque was able to take over the curator's control right under the Mediva's nose. To him, it was unthinkable to snatch a specially made golem from the hands of a more powerful mage. However, Duque could not explain to Khadgar that he was a transmigrate. How do you explain the principle of automatic control? How do you explain the gate of no and no? This was not something that could be understood with a simple explanation. Just like how Duque did not understand the basic theory of Azeroth, Duque could not explain to Khadgar this professional theory that was based on modern mathematics, electronics, and a series of other sciences. Not to mention Khadgar, anyone who was not in this line of work before transmigrating would not even have heard of these terms. Thus, in Duque's eyes, the anti-control seal that Mediv had placed on the curator was a joke. At that time, when he was in his soul form, he did not need to care about the highest control system. He only needed to modify a few feedback and basic control circuits to bypass Mediv and directly control the curator. This allowed the curator, to attack at a critical moment. Similarly, in Khadgar's eyes, Karazhan's incomparably complex magic net system was just something that needed some time to be straightened out in Duque's hands. In the original history, because Karazhan had lost the will of its master, Medivh, it had sunk deep into darkness. The Karazhan Tower had sealed itself and cut off all contact with the outside world. Now, Duque had sorted out the countless unknown magic net energy lines that had gathered here step by step. As long as Duque wanted to, it was only a matter of time before Karazhan saw the light of day again. Duque also knew that the battle outside was going on fiercely, and he wanted to go out and help as soon as possible. However, if Karazhan was not sorted out, if the Burning Legion set up a portal here or something, it would be a big problem. Thus, Duque could only dig through the books while cleaning up Karazhan. On this day, the system elf finally sent a notification. Congratulations, host. The system has stabilized the first and second levels of Karazhan based on your newly acquired spatial knowledge. You can initiate a cleanup operation on these 2 levels. Duque stood up. Khadgar, time to work. Work. I've already stabilized the first and second levels. It's time to clean them up. Really? Khadgar's eyes lit up. Unlike the serious and old-fashioned teleportation mage, Khadgar was smart and eager to learn. When he had books, he could be very quiet. When he wasn't studying, Khadgar was more lively. Khadgar was a little tired of the days where he could only go between the library and the workshop. He immediately put down the book in his hand and followed Duque and the huge curator. After passing through the blue portal that looked like an illusory mirror, after a short period of weightlessness, a man, a ghost, and a golem arrived at the first level of Karazhan. Your Excellency Marcus? A whisper suddenly came from the darkness. Huh. Duque was slightly surprised. In Duque's impression, the first level was Karazhan's horse shed. When the players in the game came to the horse shed, they only met ghost coachmen and ghost warhorses. No one would ever call Duque that. Looking in the direction of the voice, Duque understood. It was a translucent soul. His illusory soul wore the iconic Stormwind City armor, and he held a lion head shield and a standard longsword. Obviously, he was an elite soldier under Lothar who had died in Karazhan. You are? I remember you, Michael. That's great, Your Excellency still remembers me. I'm Michael Jonathan. Michael seemed to be very happy. Yes, I feel like my master. What happened? Am I dead? Where's Medivh? Where's Sargeras? Michael's questions were like a machine gun, and Duque patiently answered them one by one. I won. Then I have no regrets. It's a pity that it turned out like this. Michael's situation triggered Khadgar's sadness. The 2 ghosts had the same expression. Chapter 144. I don't know if a ghost will be reborn as a baby after being decomposed, but if you think it's a pain, I should be able to erase your soul. For some reason, a 3D model of Karazhan appeared in the system prompt. In the first layer, Michael's name was clearly shown. On Michael's note, in addition to unable to leave Karazhan, it also clearly stated that there was an option to erase the soul. For some people, existing in the form of a ghost might be a form of torture. So, Duque gave Michael a choice. Michael looked at Khadgar, who was also a ghost next to Duque. What about you? I've seen you before, Mage Khadgar. Why did you choose to continue to exist in this world? Khadgar was stunned for a moment before replying, I don't think I've lived long enough. There are too many new things in this world that I haven't seen yet. As long as I'm allowed to browse through the books of Karazhan, there's nothing wrong with being Master Duque's servant. Duque secretly complained, no wonder you're willing to listen to me. It turns out that the books are your master. Michael thought for a moment, then turned around and bowed to Duque. How about this, if there's nothing you need me for, then I have nothing to miss since I sacrificed myself to protect Stormwind and Azeroth. Then At this moment, the system suddenly gave Duque a shrill warning. Warning! Warning! According to your newly learned space theory and other knowledge, it has been detected that a space passage will be forcibly opened in 72 hours. After calculations, it is a 92. 7% match with the demon army that Sargeras summoned. According to the energy level of the spatial passage, it is estimated that there will be more than 100 low-level demons and no more than 5 mid-level demons attacking. Then, an unusually bright red countdown appeared on top of Duque's retina. Duque's expression changed immediately. Holy Age *T. I knew there was no such thing as a direct route to becoming a mage. Medivh had built a mage tower in Karazhan for 2 reasons. On one hand, it was convenient for research, and on the other hand, he had been silently guarding this world as a guardian. As the price of changing history and inheriting Karazhan, Duque had to take on the task of protecting Karazhan. In history, the Karazhan secluded themselves. This largely prevented monsters from coming to Azeroth through Karazhan and harming the people there. That saying was true. With great power comes great responsibility. Duque's right hand was infused with arcane energy. He gently placed his hand on Michael's shoulder. He was righteously bluffing. No, he was preaching about the power of holy light. Michael, if you want to find the meaning of existence, then I have a very, very important mission for you here and now. What? Michael was a little stunned. In his mind, he had just killed Sargeras, so there shouldn't be any big enemies. Duque's voice suddenly became upright, and his voice was filled with surging passion and incomparable determination. His eyes were burning, and there was even some kind of divine radiance surging on his body. Protect this place. Within 3 days, a group of demons will open a space channel and attempt to occupy Karazhan as a springboard to invade the world of Azeroth. They will harm our family, friends, and the people we love the most. Can we allow all of this? Absolutely not. We can endure loneliness, we can endure hunger, we can endure fear, but we definitely can't endure the people we love, the world we love. At this point, Duque's voice suddenly rose an octave. Michael Jonathan, are you willing to protect the world with me, to protect all of humanity? His thunderous voice echoed throughout the first level of Karazhan. In that case, please allow me, Gala Donald, to join you. A voice suddenly sounded from the depths of the stables, and another soul wearing the armor of a Stormwind soldier appeared. Count me in. Count me in too. The souls of the elite soldiers who had sacrificed themselves in Karazhan walked out from the darkness of the first and second levels. Yes, they had sacrificed themselves for the future of the people of the kingdom. Unfortunately, because of the characteristics of Karazhan, their souls were also bound here. They could not fall into hell, could not go to heaven, could not return to earth, and could not see their loved ones. Perhaps this was a kind of torture. However, at this moment, they had found a new meaning for their existence: to protect Karazhan, to protect the world. Looking at the option in the system prompt, do you want to pay 10 soul power to transform the souls of 72 elite soldiers into Einherjar? Duque decisively clicked yes. A bright silver light lit up from Duque's palm, and he gently brushed it in the air. Spots of silver light scattered on the souls of these elite soldiers. They were pleasantly surprised to find that their souls, which had become dim and showed signs of dissipating, were beginning to solidify at a high speed. The long-lost sense of touch returned to their bodies. Even though their bodies still looked a little translucent, at least this was an unexpected and pleasant change. There was no heartbeat, but there was a strong pulse from every corner of their bodies. They did not need to breathe, but they could smell the long-lost fragrance from their nostrils. Sight, touch, taste, smell, feel. These things that they had once taken for granted would only feel incomparably precious when they lost them. Every soldier's face showed surprise. Then, their expressions quickly became determined, and they quickly lined up in 3 rows. Michael, who was in the lead, pulled out the long sword that he had worn when he was alive and said loudly, "Salute our new master, the new guardian of the world, His Excellency Duke Marcus." Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. They pulled out their swords neatly, causing the dark stables to light up with a dazzling cold light. Bang, bang, bang. The Einherjars hit their shields with their swords, and there were bursts of high-spirited hitting sounds. The entire first level of Karazhan seemed to be trembling. No, this was not just a tremor. This was already a roar. It was not just the shouts and hits of these elite soldiers. It was as if every corner of Karazhan, every brick, and every pillar was emitting a low and ancient sound. They resonated as if they were responding to the will of the Einherjars, responding to their determination to protect the world. With the same excitement, Duque looked around at these Einherjars, and a satisfied expression appeared on his face. "All right, brothers, let's go all out. Let's tell those damned demons that this is Azeroth's territory, not their playground." Chapter 145. Duque knew very well that he could not stay in Karazhan forever. Outside, Stormwind City was being besieged, and the green tide of orcs was wreaking havoc on the entire continent. No matter how he looked at it, he had to hurry back as soon as possible. The task of defense could only be left to helpers like Khadgar and Michael. Although the Einherjars might be of a higher level than the original elite soldiers of Stormwind City, dealing with demons was like dealing with orcs. There was no point in simply relying on numbers. As long as it was not someone like Noxus who had entered the realm of heroes, no matter how experienced an elite soldier was, they would not be able to win against a demon. Duque suddenly recalled a game he had played before. Coupled with the mechanical traps encyclopedia that he had found in the Mediv library, Duque had an idea. 108 magicians' hands immediately appeared. They flew around the first and second floors of Karazhan. They creaked as they unloaded the wood that Duque needed, and even uprooted some of the pillars in the stable. Duque injected arcane energy into the ground, freeing the huge stone bricks from the shackles of gravity, and they flew into the air along with the soil. Khadgar was dumbfounded. He looked at Duque, who had a lot of magic theories that he did not understand before, as if he were building a building block. Like building blocks, Duque completely changed the structure of the first and second floors of Karazhan. Damn it, even if Karazhan is in the middle of a space-time crack. But if you mess around like this, Karazhan will still collapse. Khadgar could not help but exclaim, "What? Do you know anything about architecture?" Khadgar was a mage, not an old foreman of the Mason Brotherhood. When Duque said this, he was immediately stunned. "You know? Of course, as long as I don't touch the supporting pillars and load-bearing walls, even if I hollow out the first and second floors, there will be no problem. Also, I have calculated the gravity here, and it is only about 80% of the gravity outside. I can make it even sharper." Although Khadgar did not understand what Duque was saying, he did not understand. Just like that, Duque spent about a day turning the first and second floors of the Karazhan into a huge death labyrinth. Spike traps, tar traps, arrow walls, spring traps, blade walls, together with some gaps that led straight to the void turbulence, Duque ran into a propulsion trap that could knock away a huge body larger than a ton. Everything was ready except for the demons. 2 days later, at the main entrance of Karazhan, the chaotic void of red and black separated. A thick green light that was not too dazzling, like the light of moldy pea soup in a dark cuisine, illuminated the main entrance of Karazhan. In Duque's perception, it was an evil aura that pierced through the chaotic void. The unknown world connected directly to Karazhan. A huge crack was forcefully torn open in space, and some kind of magic was rapidly reinforcing the crack. A terrifying aura, so evil that it was almost tangible, gushed out from the portal. Duque, who was sitting at the end of the second floor, could also quickly smell the unpleasant aura. Beside Duque, Khadgar's expression changed slightly. After seeing Duque nod, he walked in front of a crystal ball that was flashing with arcane light and pressed his hand on the crystal ball. It was a soul crystal ball that could connect to the spirit seas of all the Einherjars on the first and second floors. "The guest has arrived. I repeat, the guest has arrived." As soon as he finished his sentence, a huge red gauntlet appeared at the entrance of the portal. The next second, a humanoid demon over 5 meters tall with crimson dragon wings stepped out of the portal. His entire body had explosive red muscles, and he wore heavy armor. His head was a bit like a rough orc's, but there were huge horns on his head that orcs did not have. He had a pair of powerful legs like those of a goat. Not only were they folded back, but they also had huge hooves. The blazing flames that wrapped around his body contrasted with his huge body, making this apocalypse guard look extremely ferocious and terrifying. Kill all those who resist here. Master Sargeras will not fall in a place like this. Search for him. Even if this place is completely destroyed, we must find the passage to Master's location. This huge demon was roaring at his subordinates in the Eridar language, which was also commonly known by humans as the demon language. Countless terrifying figures rushed out from his side. There was a demon hound that was completely red and had 4 limbs on the ground. It had 2 long black and white tentacles and 2 huge bull horns. There was also a demon guard that was bare-chested, had indigo skin, and had strong chest muscles. Apart from their bare upper bodies, the demon guard's arms and waist were covered in heavy armor that was mainly red with white edges. Long crimson horns grew out from his head and back. There was also a void demon that was covered in armor. Its true form was actually an inverted triangular dark blue energy body. They swarmed forward in a chaotic manner and rushed into the long passage at the main gate of Karazhan. Suddenly, the fastest hellhound seemed to have stepped on something. The sound of metal rubbing could be heard in the darkness. In the next second, dozens of sharp spikes shot out from the floor. As if they wanted to skewer the hellhound, they pierced the abdomen of the hellhound. As the scouts of the demon army, the hellhound had agility that Duque did not know about. The moment the spikes were about to touch its abdomen, the hellhound suddenly arched its back and bounced into the air like a spring. Unfortunately, without any warning, a 2-meter by 2-meter square suddenly fell from the ceiling. Before the hellhound could do anything else, it was abruptly knocked back to the ground. *Chi. The sharp metal spikes ended the hellhound's life. Accompanied by a series of clattering sounds, the spikes were retracted back into the ground. The ceiling that had fallen a certain distance was also pulled back up by the stirring gears, quietly waiting for the next victim. Of course, there was more than one hellhound that was hit. The demons charged forward. Suddenly, there was a bang. A huge demon that could easily kill 20 elite human warriors was suddenly sent flying by a metal brick from the ground. The unlucky guy was caught off guard. Like a cannonball that had been stuffed into the barrel of a cannon, he was ejected with a loud bang. Demons were not beasts that had no intelligence and only knew how to kill. They were shocked by the strange situation. Their eyes followed the figure of the victim until the victim hit a wall and stopped. Only then did their eyes start to focus. Before they could shift their focus, 3 sets of crossed giant axes suddenly popped out from the seemingly ordinary wall. Those axes were ridiculously heavy even when carried by ogres. The axe blade, which had a diameter of more than a meter, could easily chop off a dragon's neck, let alone a demon. With a chilling glint, the demon only had time to scream before the cold gleam of the axes flashed across his body. On the wall, there were only a few deep cracks, splattered demon blood, and scattered pieces of flesh that could no longer be pieced together. What's going on? Chapter 146. The invasion of the demons was over. None of the 185 demons were spared. They were all killed on the first floor. None of the Einherjars were lost. Duque was very satisfied with the result. But Duque was more satisfied with the connection between the things in Karazhan's mage tower and himself. Through the system control, he could almost grasp all the details of the first and second floors. As long as he was willing, he could see every space inside, as if his soul had left his body. What a wonderful feeling! If only I could control magic so meticulously, and control the whole situation so powerfully, and control the power of every group of elements, Duque said to himself. Control every group of elemental power. Wait, control every group of elements? When he thought of this, Duque suddenly had a feeling of enlightenment. Just do it. He slowly poured the arcane energy into his eyes at a pace that his eyes could adapt to. When he closed his eyes and opened them again, Duque suddenly found that he saw a new world. Unlike the various basic substances that made up the world, it was a pure elemental world. As far as he could see, the thick walls around him had turned into groups of solid yellow earth elements. They were almost motionless, in a state that was close to solidifying. In the more empty places, there should be air flowing, but the situation was completely different. Duque sensed the wind elements. The light and ethereal wind elements were floating in the air with some water elements, almost without any pattern. They just followed the space set by the earth elements and flowed along the long and narrow corridor. With a flash of inspiration, Duque stretched out his hand, and a ball of flame was instantly born in his palm. In this elemental world, Duque could clearly see that countless small lights quickly gathered in his hand from all directions. The yellow light spots became bigger and brighter, and finally gathered into a ball. It was clearly just a small ball of flame, but Duque felt very accomplished. Because just looking at the ball of fire elements, it gave Duque the feeling of creating a new star. From the light of a grain of rice, it gathered a light that was tens of thousands of times brighter than before. In the end, it became a dazzling light that even the naked eye did not dare to look at directly. Gently closing his palm, Duque reached out to the earth elementals around him. Beep. It was a strange sound. However, Duque discovered that he had gained control over the earth element. As his fingers pinched, rubbed, and rubbed, the earth element in his palm changed accordingly. It was like a piece of clay that allowed Duque to knead and flatten it. Next to Duque, Khadgar watched in shock as Duque stirred the stone wall as if he was stirring a ball of dough. In that instant, Khadgar lost the ability to speak. From Khadgar's perspective, magic was only suitable for destruction. How could it accomplish such a thing? Duque ignored Khadgar. He was still immersed in this rare experience. Logically speaking, by controlling the earth element in such a way, his power should have flowed out like a flood. In fact, when he truly grasped the earth elemental, Duque even discovered that it was the energy extracted from the earth elemental that helped him further transform the earth elemental. Not only the earth element, but the fire and water elements were also doing the same. Duque easily extracted the heat from the water element, and a large ice prism appeared in the air above Duque's head. When the heat combined with the fire element in the air, tens of fireballs of various sizes appeared at Duque's feet. What? Khadgar could not believe his eyes. Duque was actually using fire and ice magic at the same time. Weren't these two types of magic in conflict? Using either fire or ice to connect two opposing elemental worlds at the same time was simply courting death. Was Duque courting death? Obviously not. In Khadgar's field of vision, Duque lightly flicked his finger, combining the ice prism and the fireball into a frostfire arrow that contained both the power of fire and ice. That frostfire arrow pierced through the first wall, leaving behind a burn mark the size of a bowl. It then pierced through the second wall, leaving behind a large hole covered in ice. Finally, it exploded at the third wall, causing half of the wall to collapse. This was not the end. The first wall had clearly been scorched by fire, but a second later, it had completely turned into ice and exploded. The second wall was the exact opposite. What exploded from the ice crack was a blazing magma-like flame. Khadgar was completely stunned. How is this possible? Duque did not reply. Instead, he muttered to himself, I understand why earth mages are earth mages. It's because earth mages can only be fixed to the ground, unable to move at all. They can only passively receive power from their surroundings. But sky mages are different. Everything in the sky can be used by them, changed by them, created for them, and destroyed for them. Thus, sky mages are the rulers of the entire sky. As the word ruler was spoken, Duque felt that in his spiritual world that had been lost for a long time, in that dark and chaotic world where he could not find his way forward, a bright light seemed to flash. That light was like a spark that set a prairie ablaze, splitting into two into four, splitting endlessly. In just a moment, Duque's entire spiritual world had been lit up, and the endless flames had finally heated up the entire spiritual world. Brighter and brighter, hotter and hotter. Then, the illusion of light in the spiritual world shattered, turning into information that Duque could understand and the system elf could accept. Countless green lights and characters appeared on Duque's retina, finally turning into a line of extremely eye-catching green characters. Congratulations. You have successfully become a sky mage. Duque suddenly realized that this was the legacy that Medivh had left for him. If he did not accept Karazhan, he would not have started to modify space. If he did not modify space, he would not have had a deep understanding of space. Without this understanding, he would not have been able to advance. This was not something that any book could teach him. Only by personally experiencing it would one be able to master the power to dominate the elements of heaven and earth, amidst the countless changes of the elements of heaven and earth. Phew! Duque let out a long breath. At this moment, a line of red words suddenly popped up. Your servant Reginald Windsor is in a state of near death. Chapter 147. Was Stormwind going to be destroyed? This was what every citizen of Stormwind had been discussing in private for the past few months. The orcs were too terrifying. Every survivor of the orcs was telling their fears to others. If it wasn't for King Lang, clad in dazzling golden armor, patrolling the walls of Stormwind 3 times a day, perhaps this unease would have spread endlessly. Lang Rin, Anduin Lothar, and Bolvar for Dragon. The 3 of them had become the backbone of the people's hearts at some point. Looking at the walls that were getting thicker and taller, looking at the huge archer towers and catapults that were growing a story higher every day, the people's hearts were finally a little comforted. Standing on the outer wall of Stormwind and looking at the dense forest in the distance for a while, Lang retracted his gaze. The original outer wall of Stormwind had been modified beyond recognition. After the outer wall was almost doubled in thickness with that magical cement, the height of the wall had also increased by half. Not only that, there were 2 more walls outside the outer wall, and 2 huge hunting spaces between the walls. According to the blueprint, this was called Barbican. The 3 walls were connected by a relatively narrow passageway. At the crucial point, there was only a large iron plate. Next to the iron plate was a bolt, which was attached to a small passageway. As long as a soldier pulled out the bolt, or someone on the wall pulled out the iron chain connecting the bolt, the iron plate would fall. Not only that, but the newly built walls were also different from the traditional ones. From the outside, there were many enigmatic diamond-shaped structures. Whether it was Lothar or Bolvar, all the officers who had been to the front lines had said that this structure was very good. It could effectively defend against the crude but powerful catapults of the orcs. Behind the 3 outer walls was a huge hexagonal archer tower that rose from the ground. The pointed side of the archer tower pointed outwards, and the higher the tower, the narrower it became. If it wasn't for the invention of a technique called reverse mold, this would have been an inconceivable thing. Other than the archer tower, there were even larger turrets that could hold several ballistae or a large catapult. Just the sight of so many war machines was enough to make one's hair stand on end. And all of this was done after the beastmen invaded the elven forest. Edwin, are these all Duque's blueprints? Lang was very satisfied, but he still had some doubts as he asked the young man beside him. Edwin Van Cleef, 28, senior foreman of the Brotherhood of Masons. However, he was now employed by Duque to serve the king as a project supervisor sent by Duque. Yes, Your Majesty. Right now, Van Cleef was far from the evil leader of the faction of evil who was slandered by a despicable black dragon, persecuted by the nobles of Stormwind City, and rose up in revolt to form the Defias Brotherhood, to occupy the Moon Creek town in the western wilderness, turning the mines there into death mines, attacking any Stormwind citizens and resisting the regime of Stormwind City. Edwin Van Cleef was at his most hot-blooded and righteous age. He was flattered when Makarov came to him with Duque's orders. Makarov was Sea King Duque's butler. Duke Marcus, the kingdom's brightest star, a rapidly rising business magnate, a rising star in the world of magic, and the master of a new faction in Stormwind. And he was just a craftsman who was looked down upon by the upper class. He did not expect that Duque's representative, Makarov, would come to him personally. When Makarov explained the purpose of his visit, saying that Duque wished to take him in as a direct follower, he did not hesitate to accept Duque's invitation. Even though he never had the chance to meet his master, what happened afterwards further strengthened Edwin's loyalty. Duque wanted him to build a large number of fortresses for the kingdom to slow down the advance of the orc army. He also wanted to modify Stormwind City's defense system. The pay was ample. Duque paid for all the wages in advance: gold coins, high-quality white bread, or delicious fish. When these choices were placed in front of Van Cleef, he almost cried on the spot. Due to the influx of refugees in Stormwind, the supply of daily necessities had become difficult, and these three items were urgently needed by the impoverished Mason Brotherhood. Coupled with the national crisis, the craftsmen burst forth with 200% enthusiasm, almost forgetting themselves as they worked. Countless people fainted on the construction site, but not a single one of them complained. Duque also fulfilled his promise, sending out ships to send off the families of the craftsmen. Generally speaking, the earliest batch to leave was a treatment that only the nobles could enjoy. After sending off his beloved daughter, Vanessa, Edwin became even more loyal to Duque. King Lang did not know about these small matters, but he was pleased to see Edwin's fanatical loyalty. He patted Edwin's shoulder. "You did well. The outer wall is done, go work on the inner wall. The orcs are coming soon, and the next step is the warrior's domain." "Yes, your majesty." Not long after, a gust of wind with a fishy stench suddenly surged out of the forest. The turbulent air swirled, carrying sand and weeds into the air. They gathered together to form a huge gust of wind. The gust passed through the flat forest and rushed towards the outer wall of Stormwind, blowing up leaves and sand so hard that the warriors could not even lift their heads. At this moment, everyone could not help but shield their eyes with their hands. They let their hair sway in the gap between their helmets and heads, and were shocked to see the green that appeared in the forest with the gust of wind. The surging green brought with it the sound of thunderous footsteps. Countless different kinds of green filled the entire forest. It was like an army of ants that covered the mountains and plains. They converged into a river, and the river then turned into an ocean, pouring out of the forest. The thick green tide rolled endlessly, and the orcs squeezed out of every crevice in the forest like a frenzied tide. Every nook and cranny of the forest began to surge, and an ominous green color was reflected in the eyes of every soldier. What followed was the sound of war drums and bugles that sounded like rolling thunder. For the sake of battle, all the trees within a kilometer of the city wall had been cut down. But the green tide of orcs had squeezed a full 800 meters of open space in their field of vision. In front of them was a tall green-skinned orc, carrying two huge beast skeletons on his shoulders. He was riding on a warg, which was the largest among all the other wargs. This warg was even more majestic than the largest bull humans had ever seen. The warg raised half of its body and howled at the sky, its pure black mane spreading in the wind. It looked fierce and awe-inspiring. A woo! Chapter 148. Woo woo woo. For thousands of years, the wolves had been communicating with each other by howling. The alpha wolf's loud and fierce howl was heard, and all the wolves in the tribe responded immediately. The continuous and terrifying howl of the wolves was heard. A huge wave of sound engulfed the outer walls of Stormwind City. The terrifying sound suddenly made the warriors of Stormwind City think of a terrible rumor. The cruel and bloodthirsty orcs only ate living humans, and the warriors who died on the battlefield would be given to the wolves to eat. Thinking back on the habits of the wolves in this world, it was possible. Wolves were the wildest and most ferocious animals. They would not eat their own kind, and that was only when their own kind was still alive. Once their own kind died in any way, the meat of their own kind would be no different from other kinds of meat. The thought of their bodies being torn apart and eaten by these huge monsters made the hands of many new soldiers who had never faced orcs tremble, and their teeth chattered. Lang and Andoin, who were sitting on the highest level of the inner city wall, frowned when they saw this scene. At this moment, a messenger trotted over. Sir Windsor requested to fire the ballista. He said that there is a special ballista that can teach that beast a lesson. Proof. As the supreme commander of the front line, even if Lang was present, Lothar was the one who gave the orders most of the time. Seeing the signal, Windsor personally operated the ballista on the ballista that was almost 30 meters above the ground. He glanced at the flag that was stuck on the ballista that was fluttering in the wind, and muttered, "The wind is from the east to the west. Wind force, level 3. Then Windsor straightened his arm and raised his thumb to roughly estimate the distance. 250 yards. Finally, he adjusted the capstan to the scale that he had no idea what it was a few months ago. It was clearly marked on the scale that, according to the height, the distance had to be adjusted according to the distance when the capstan was full. Good. Fire. Thump. The loud sound of a bowstring was heard. At first, no one paid attention to the ballista. In this crude era, all kinds of heavy weapons had to be tested. Regardless of whether it was the ballista, catapults, or cannons, they would generally fire in a certain direction and then slowly adjust. Whoever could hit the target within 3 rounds of shooting would be crowned as a godly archer. The first shot should have been the cannon. However, he could not find a qualified cannoneer in all of Stormwind. Even the 4 8-pounder cannons that Stormwind City currently had were bought from the dwarves' Iron Furnace Castle in a hurry after they lost the Battle of Red Ridge Mountain. The impromptu gunner training was simply not up to par. It couldn't be helped. In this era, apart from the nobles and a few lucky people, most people were illiterate. It was impressive to find a few smart people who knew how to fire a cannon. Hence, when Windsor volunteered to be the first one, Lang, Andoin, and Bolvar did not have much hope. Who knew that a miracle would happen? A long black rainbow streaked across the sky above Stormwind City, blinding the eyes of the orcs. From the sky, this black line seemed to be shooting straight towards the Great Chief's black hand. They watched as the black dot in the distance rapidly expanded in their field of vision. Not only the orc guards around the Great Chief, but even Black Hand himself also felt that something was wrong. *CK. How could a human ballista shoot so far? It was not that the orcs had never seen a human ballista. Most human ballista did not have such a long range. Of course, the orcs did not know that this was a specially modified ballista by a transmigrator who studied in a decathlon but was not proficient in any of the mechanical engineering disciplines. Without time to think, Orgrim Doomhammer, who was standing beside the Great Chief, suddenly swelled his muscles. This future Great Chief suddenly leaped forward and smashed the huge ballista in the air with his hammer. Bang! It had to be said that those who entered the realm of heroes were all freaks. A ballista with a speed of at least 50 kilometers per hour, and Orgrim, the maniac, just took it head-on. He had really hit the target. However, since it was something created by Duque, how could it be so simple? This was a specially made mother-child exploding arrow. Orgrim had indeed knocked away the mother arrow with his hammer, but even more of the smaller steel balls were raining down on the chief and the howling warg beneath him like a rain of shotguns. Clap, 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 clap. The dense rain of bullets directly hit Black Hand and his precious warg leader. Ah! Whoa! The Great Chief's scream and the warg leader's sorrowful cry caused the entire wolf pack to freeze. The warg's low intelligence made them unable to understand why their boss would suddenly stop screaming. Seeing the orc leader and his big dog get hit by the ballista, and hearing the entire wolf pack cry out like a rooster that had been strangled by its neck, the morale of the Stormwind warriors who had been a little low rose again. Wah! You can't play anymore, can you? Green beasts! A bunch of stray dogs, who are you trying to scare? The warriors burst out in mocking laughter. King Lang's spirit was lifted. He gave Windsor a thumbs up and then pulled out his sword. The cold light of the king's sword was dazzling in the morning light. Lang's clear and loud voice spread across the 3 city walls. 1,000 years ago, our ancestors brought your ancestors to this valley. For 1,000 years, we have lived here. Behind us is our home. This is the home of our descendants. Can we allow these cruel green beasts to occupy our home? No. Then what are you waiting for? Pull out your swords. Let the bodies of these green beasts fill the elven forest. At this time, Noxus was the first to respond. He pulled out his sword and raised it high. For Stormwind City. For Azeroth. For Stormwind City. For Azeroth. Swords and halberds were like a forest, cold light overflowing. Morale was high. Feeling the explosion of voices from the city walls, the chief's green face almost turned dark green. His heart ached for his old friend who was constantly crying. The steel balls that were shot out just now, he relied on the strength of his body after drinking the devil's blood and his thick skin to withstand it. But his warg had never drunk devil's blood. Wolves were never good at defense. Black Hand watched as his warg leader's eyes were blinded by the steel balls, and the front half of his body was filled with potholes and bloody wounds that were as deep as a finger's length. He knew that his old buddy was done for. He fiercely bared his fangs, and Black Hand directly smashed his beloved warg to death with his hammer. With endless anger, the chief's roar spread throughout the entire tribe. Attack! Chapter 149. As the earth rumbled, the green tide split into three. The sharp battle axes shone fiercely under the sun. Looking down from above, it was as if the elven forest had grown a giant trident. Lothar gently raised his left hand and slammed it down quickly and forcefully. Tut tut tut. After a strange sound of a winch loosening, 10 baskets of gravel were hurled from the 10 catapult towers behind Lothar that were higher than the tallest outer city wall. The irregular gravel scattered in the air, emitting a heart-chilling whistling sound. A few seconds later, under the acceleration of gravity, the gravel was like a storm that instantly enveloped the surging green tide. It was not that the orcs had used catapults before, but they had never seen such a way of using them. Usually, the orcs would not even bother to look at the gravel that was the size of a human's fist. But now, under the high speed, the gravel had become a lethal weapon. An unlucky orc who was hit first had his face deformed. Then, the bones of his cheeks and chin were crushed by the huge impact, along with his protruding fangs. The momentum brought the head and the burly body to a stop, and in an instant, it began to reverse the momentum of the body. The skull instantly turned into countless pieces of flesh and blood in the process. At the same time, the brain burst out, and the neck bone broke at the same time. After the orc was blasted away, his corpse that was gradually turning cold fell to the ground. Most of the orcs who were hit either died on the spot or had their internal organs smashed to pieces. The blood they vomited was accompanied by a large amount of internal organ fragments. It was only a matter of time before they died. The great chief Black Hand and Orgrim narrowed their eyes at the fierceness of the humans' long-range firepower. This was just the beginning. As Lothar pulled out his long sword, it fell with a rustle. There was a whoosh at the same time in the gaps between the 3 layers of the city wall and the walls. Generally speaking, it was difficult to associate a buzzing sound with the dark sky. But after this buzzing sound, the entire sky darkened. Orgrim subconsciously looked up and saw a large black rain falling from the sky above the giant human city. He immediately recognized that it was a spear thrown by the despicable humans. This was the greatest blasphemy to the brave horde warriors. Many soldiers didn't die on the battlefield, but from these strange and disgusting javelins. Once hit, the spearhead or the weak part of the spear shaft would be left in the body. In hot weather, even if you use a dagger to dig out the spearhead, it is very easy for the wound to rot. Orgrim had seen with his own eyes how a few warriors were dragged to their deaths. Damn it! If there's a shaman! Orgrim could only mutter to himself. The traditional shamans of the tribe had been replaced by the more sinister and sinister warlocks. There wasn't a single shaman in the entire tribal expeditionary army who could heal. What infuriated Orgrim even more was the news he received. His close friend, the chief of the Frostwolf clan, Durotan, had brought his wife, Draka, to visit him 2 days ago. A few months ago, because he suspected that Ghoul, Dan had made a deal with the demons. Ghoul, Dan had acted first and used the great chief's dark hand to banish Durotan and the Frostwolf clan out of the tribe. That was the distant Alterac Valley. But 2 days ago, Durotan had told him about Ghoul Dan's betrayal. Orgrim swore that Ghoul Dan would be punished for his actions, and had sent one of his guards to send Durotan and his family off. Recently Ghoul Dan had disappeared. From what he could remember, Ghoul Dan had not appeared in public for more than 2 months. Orgrim requested that Black Hand punish Ghoul Dan and the Shadow Council, but was mercilessly rejected. This caused Orgrim's dissatisfaction to rise. All he lacked was a reason to explode. Looking at Blackhand's clumsy command, Orgrim felt like vomiting. The dark and heavy rain of javelins pounced on them, and the charging orcs seemed to have run into an invisible wall. In an instant, they were like harvested wheat, falling in large swathes. The grass was a mess, and there were corpses of beastmen soldiers nailed to the ground everywhere. Before the battle, Orgrim had strongly urged the soldiers to be equipped with thick shields. After all, sieging a city was different from fighting in the field. But what did Blackhand say? The invincible beastman warriors do not fear the despicable javelins. This was simply using the beastmen soldiers to fill a pit of death that could never be filled. The dark portal had mysteriously closed, and Ghoul, Dan had disappeared. The beastman expedition had no more reinforcements. The Horde's warriors were one less dead, and Blackhand was still wasting the lives of the warriors like this. Orgrim ground his fangs together. The city has been breached? Suddenly, a shout of joy came from the front. Orgrim instinctively felt that something was wrong. It was too simple. The defense line that the humans had set up for so long had been breached so easily? The heavy losses in the previous town of Stormwind City were still fresh in Orgrim's mind. Blackhand waved his petrified fist triumphantly and roared, "Look! The warriors of the Horde are invincible." Nearly 1,000 beastmen rushed in through the wooden gate, and Orgrim immediately realized that something was wrong. When the large number of beastmen rushed in, a steel fence as thick as a beastman's thighs suddenly fell on the gate. In the next moment, flames shot into the sky. The entire battlefield was suddenly filled with the cries of despair of thousands of beastmen. That was the barbican used to lure the enemy. It was filled with whale fat. When the large number of beastmen rushed in, the human soldiers put down the strengthened version of the 1,000-pound gate and lit it on fire. The orcs were indeed brave warriors, but in front of the 10-meter-tall steep city wall, and in front of thousands of harpooneers and pikemen who were ready for battle, climbing up the wall was destined to be futile. Countless torches were thrown down, easily turning the entire barbican into a fiery hell. The screams of the beastmen ambushed even made the beastmen outside who were trying to climb the wall with clumsy wooden ladders pause. "Ha! Good burning!" Even though the burnt smell of roasted meat could be clearly smelled through the mask prepared beforehand, King Lang was still very excited and loudly praised the brilliant plan that Duque had left behind. The terrible losses made the chief's face as dark as the bottom of a pot. Retreat! Blackhand rarely gave the order to retreat. Then, for 7 days in a row, the Horde launched fierce attacks on Stormwind City again and again. Every day, the Horde lost at least 3,000 corpses, but the Horde's best result was just to break through the second wall. On the 8th day, the situation took a turn for the better. I found a way to conquer Stormwind City. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.